What's up, y'all? Man, y'all are fast. Hopped in here already. Andre, get on up here. Just approved you. We even got Mike from UD here. What's up, Mike? Well, guys, happy $5 Friday. It is gorgeous day here in Puerto Rico, and I'm seeing the registrations trickle in. I saw Domain James actually bought like $1,000 worth of domains for 500 bucks earlier. I mean, those are just enormous sums. But great to see that you guys are taking advantage. I know a lot of you guys have reached out about the $4 com promo we ran twice in the past 2 weeks or so. That was just a random flash sale that probably won't recur. We'll see. But man, you guys ate that stuff up. Andre, how's it going, man?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. It's a crazy week. I do get myself about, I don't know, 50 domains a day nowadays. And I only got I got a bit less today, fewer today and yesterday because just, the market is what it is. I deal with whatever it gives me. But yeah, I have very frequent periods where I register over 50 domains a day. And really, like was said in the tweet in question, is just great value. And it's quite a time to be tuned into domains, like I'm an economist as well, so I tune into a lot of stuff. And we have quite a bit of craziness this week with the government shutdowns, with, as we speak, Bitcoin catching a pretty strong bid that's doing well. And we can talk about the ramifications when it comes to domains there as well. And it should humble us, because we have good things to say about the industry. I just went through some name bio data for the first half of 2025, and we are up in terms of volume 40% year over year. So the first half of 2025 compared to the first half of 2024, which is just
50%. Wow.
yeah, that's insane. But at the same time, we need to be humble and kind of understand just how small our industry still is and how many opportunities that brings about. Because listen to this, the total volume over the first half of 2024, according to Name Biodata, is for the entire period $10 million less than what came into Bitcoin inflows in an average day since the ETFs were launched in January of 2024. So people who think you're too late to domains, I do not think they're correct. I think that people who work hard are just early enough. There's more than enough money for everyone here to make, as long as you come here with the proper mindset. Like I do like the fact that in domains you are rewarded not just for allocating capital, but also for working hard. And as long as people understand that, there's still just insane money to be made once you realize how small our industry still is.
Yeah. Well, of course, you have to normalize that against the underlying value of the asset, right? Like, what is the expected value of the asset class versus what it is now? So, but yeah, obviously, like much smaller industry, there's a lot less efficient markets in domaining. I mean, it's kind of insane that you guys like hand ragging is a viable strategy, just given the fact that there's been 30 years plus of opportunity to hand reg everything under the sun, yet there's still gems sitting on the ground waiting for you to pick up. So it's a testament to just how few people there are here. It's very it's there's a lot of greenfield opportunity for people.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I'm Bitcoin and crypto in general and domains are just two different things, and they need to be treated as such. The ETF flows show that kind of Bitcoin is trying to find itself a place in the global plumbing of kind of like a legitimate place for even the big players to park adequate amounts of liquidity. And with that said, if it is to truly achieve that goal, that a case could be made that even today's market cap is still quite small for that. Like we have, for the sake of our conversation, $250 billion in assets worldwide, and Bitcoin's market cap, especially, I think if you adjust for coins that are stolen and otherwise unavailable, that's what $2 trillion. It's quite low, and the market is desperate for alternatives to the dollar, but it's not as easy as people think. But that kind of goes beyond the scope of this show. What matters is that domaining is on the radar. We've talked about, Namecheap valued at 1.5 billion. That's huge for the industry. And they're just two completely different things, Like I think There's overlap for sure. As someone who's interested in domains, it makes sense to pay attention to crypto as well. Same with the other way around. It all depends on what you have to do. And yeah, when you hand reg domains, it happens to me quite frequently to come across domains where I'm like, man, it's been, you know, over the past week, I have found better domains than I remember finding in 2019 when I was on a similar hand registration spree, for example. It's dependent on a lot of things. You have very good inventory expiring for the average domainer. I think it sounds counterintuitive, but I think some developments have been positive for the average domainer that have been negative for bigger players. More specifically, the fact that .com prices went up, and it might seem stupid at first, but it's not stupid because when .com prices go up, then and I'm talking about the wholesale cost here. The big players think huge domains and whatnot. To them, the price of a .com wholesale going up by, I don't know, $3 over a multi-year period can make the difference between significant segments of their portfolios being profitable and them no longer being profitable. So it's a huge thing. And guess what they have to do? They have to prune their portfolio. And when you have, I don't know how many huge domains have, must be something like 5 million domains. When you have that many, they don't prune their portfolio like you and I do it. They don't go through domains one at a time and say, "Oh, let me see what I can do with this. Let me see what I can do with that." They don't. They drop domains in huge batches, and that's amazing because yeah, most of those domains are literally worthless. It's you don't get to 5 million domains by being super picky. Let me put it that way. But within each batch of worthless domains, for the most part, that a player like that drops, you as a smaller player, I promise you can find gems. But it means, like since I've been starting doing these lists again, I have literally gone through millions of .com domains, millions personally. Each and every domain, my eyeballs have gone through them and I paid attention to them and I gave them at least a millisecond of my time worth of thought. And that's what it takes, If you're willing to do what I do and kind of like go through these 20,000 plus domains each day and do so consistently, then I think you can do well. But again, it's not just the amount of money you allocate. The value you provide is your time and expertise that it takes to find those domains. That's the money you're spending more so than the registration cost of the domain. And people need to come to terms to that because you're only on this planet for however many years you're going to live. So, yeah.
Yeah. I do wonder how much like LLM integration they have at huge domains when they're trying to, you know, categorize domains and value them. It's also funny to imagine they're dropping all these hundreds of thousands of names every year and then picking them right back up at drop catch if for their own portfolio in some cases. Yeah, is there a strategy where you can like basically identify that some domains are being dropped by like you sharps rather than just some random SMB at GoDaddy? Like can you monitor the huge domains portfolio and then see when drops are coming up in droves and then know that you should scan drop catch more closely that week?
You can do it, yeah, and I promise you there are degenerates who have tried. But it's personally not something I do. I just treat each day like kind of like a sailor who looks at all these waves that the ocean is throwing at you. You hope the market is going to be kind to you that day. And based on the domains that are available to you at that point in time, you make determinations as to what you keep and what you don't keep. I the more time goes by and the more stuff I do online, the more I realize just kind of how much value there is in just keeping things simple. But just through the sheer size of their operation, I can promise you that if you're watching us right now, if you're, sorry, listening to us right now, and you've spent any reasonable amount of time going through deleted domains, you probably have huge domains inventory, former huge domains inventory in your portfolio. And, it is what it is. They have their methodology. It's not perfect. Again, I sometimes do consulting on the side, and I've consulted with. I mentioned in the last show that some Wall Street types who were one of them was actually interested in some and you guys as a registrar, generally speaking, and in the ecosystem. But I also consult with sometimes I consulted, for example, with crypto quant guys, where they had like 20 quants on their team who were like amazing mathematicians, but they weren't so good at global macro, let's say. Fine. But what I'm trying to say is that even the Bitcoin market is a lot more efficient than people think. And I'm not allowed to say too much for obvious reasons, but let me tell you that even small operations, like the type of smaller hedge funds in terms of asset under management that come to me for consulting, they deploy things in terms of collecting and leveraging data that you would not believe. So there's a reason why I own nevertrade.org and why I shout from the rooftops to anyone who cares to listen that you should not trade crypto. You should not trade stocks because you will lose your mind, and many people, I'm afraid, will lose their lives. It's just way too efficient of market for you to develop an edge. In stark contrast, what I like about our little market is that, yeah, the volumes pale compared to crypto. But if you think the domain market is efficient, I believe you are very, very much so mistaken. There are so many opportunities to have, so many things that you can exploit to have an edge. And I, I think what I love most about this industry is that you can have so many people do so many different things, contradictory things even, and yet here they are. They're all making money. It works. They all have their little piece of the pie. They all have a little bit of an edge that they've developed, and they leverage that edge. And that's the way to go. Not chasing dreams and buying get rich quick courses that about learning how to trade and whatever. I think the real money is kind of discovering the industries where you can have an edge, whether it's domain names, whether it's something you do for a living, making as much money as humanly possible working in those industries. And then, by all means, you buy some Bitcoin, you buy some land. I love both. You know that very well. And it is that simple. Do that and you never have to buy another personal finance book again. But how many people do you know who do that and diligently do that and diligently do that over a period of decades? I would say probably not that many.
Yeah. And the takeaway from, you saying don't trade stocks or crypto or whatever shouldn't be that you shouldn't invest long term and get
Yeah.
exposure to the large caps and like the obvious winners in those spaces if you do believe the underlying thesis. The point is like people dedicate their lives and have like, jobs completely and like utterly spending every second of the day poring over all the latest news pertinent to that industry and looking like just having complete awareness of all the factors that are going to dictate the price of any given crypto on any given day or stock or whatever. But in the long run, like you can bet on, you know, basically American rule of law, financial markets, technological innovation, and all these things are just like uber bullish. Not to mention Trump being extremely bullish. Like even today, I saw something he was saying he was going to hand out stimulus checks with tariff revenue, which is like just completely irresponsible and completely unnecessary. But again, like we're just in this kind of moment in the markets where we have two different economies, at least in the US. Like we have record low like job opening postings. Employment looks fine, but also like everything's at all-time highs, while at the same time like new grads are struggling to find jobs, and there's like real stagnation in every stock and earnings call beyond the Mag 7. So it's a real tale of two economies right now. How are you looking at, everything peaking right now? How are you positioning yourself, Andre?
I am looking at absolutely everything because I have to. I think most people shouldn't. And if you are to listen to me and remember just one thing from all the interactions you're ever going to have with me, it's this: work hard and accumulate desirable assets over long periods of time. That's the secret to personal finance. That's it. Nothing else. Just do it consistently over many years. That's literally it. I have a PhD in economics. I've published 4 books. I worry about these things day in and day out. It's not worth it for the average person to go just beyond these basics. Because let me tell you something. And what are desirable assets? Anything you like. I don't even care. I like land. Buying land right now. I bought some income producing rental properties in the past. I like that as well. I like precious metals. I like crypto. You decide what you like, accumulate that in whichever quantities you can afford over relatively long periods of time, and you're going to be fine. I mean, just think, even if you're the worst, you have the worst luck of all people on this planet. And whenever you buy something, it collapses by 50%. It doesn't even matter then, because as long as you diligently accumulate desirable assets, like Brady alluded to, so assets, whether it's a crypto that you think has staying power, or a piece of land you like, or a property that produces income, anything, even if you buy it at the worst possible context in the market, over 20 years from now, it's all going to be noise probably, and you're just going to be happy you have the property,
Yeah,
you know?
as Buffett said, I would rather have, was it him or Charlie Munger? I would rather have, a quality asset at a fair price than a fair asset at a great price, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
if
He
you if
is
you're focusing on quality, the entry can be massaged either way and it'll all work out.
if you value your mental health, your life will be no better. You can worry about these things all day like traders do, and at the end of the day, you still won't have any edge. Just focus on what you do best in your life. If you're a good mechanic, do that. If you're good at picking domains, do that. Find an edge and just don't overcomplicate your life. You're not here for a very long time.
And truly, like most people, it's probably not even like most people shouldn't get into domaining, just like most people shouldn't get into trading stocks or trading crypto. It is like an intensely time consuming process. There is a very slow learning curve because of the feedback loop and the sell through rate being extremely low. And it's just I mean, there's no way to buy an ETF, unfortunately, and this is something, I harp on a lot and something we think about at Unstoppable, which is that the barriers to entry are just so high for people. And you can't, invest in a basket of fractionalized domains like you would in REIT or an ETF or similar vehicles. So yeah, for the vast majority of people, the answer is no, you should not get into it. But if you have that masochistic edge, then by all means. I see we got UFO in the audience here. Let's get him up here. I've been talking to him lately. So, but in terms of like the market, Andre, like how are you? How are you feeling? Are you feeling toppy? Are you feeling like we just started the cutting cycle? We've got legs to run here. Like, how are you looking at things? And then how does that translate into the domain market?
I don't think the right way to look at the market is kind of figure out. I definitely agree that assets across the board are overvalued across any metric worth analyzing. But then the problem becomes what's the alternative? And I think the narrative here, the story here, is that the market desperately wants an alternative to the US dollar, but an alternative to the US dollar does not exist right now. And so the market cannot help but test all of these buckets. Let's try some money even in Bitcoin, but that's such a small bucket. There's no way that let's allocate some money, some more money towards precious metals. But even so, yeah, sure, gold has a market cap of, I don't know, 12 times greater than that of Bitcoin, but that's not enough either. So it's not, you know, this is the story right now. It's clear to the market beyond any reasonable doubt that at this point in time, chances are that currency debasement is the only plausible approach. And don't understand currency debasement as in your currency losing value overnight, but rather something along the lines of people having less and less confidence in that currency to act as a store of value. Even temporarily, it's not like 30 years ago, for example, if you thought, like you've said, that, oh, I think stocks are kind of toppy, so let me seek refuge in the dollar for the time being, wait it out a year, and if I'm wrong, I'm only going to lose a couple percent in purchasing power and it's going to be fine. Right now, the market is kind of realizing that the couple percent in purchasing power loss nowadays is getting higher. Chances are it's going to persist because it's not like the market wants to buy deflation. So at the end of the day, currency debasement is the only game in town. And now we have this kind of game of hot potato where on the one hand, stocks seem overvalued. That's a stock, but so much seems overvalued, but the dollar seems like an even hotter potato. And I don't want that. And the market doesn't want that. So it's kind of like this fine juggling act between assets, which I understand to be the market's desperate attempt at finding alternatives to the dollar, which do not exist. BRICS is a joke, in my opinion, as an alternative short term. Again, not talking about 20 years from now. China doesn't exist in terms of reserves. And I think the last people on this planet who want the renminbi to be the reserve currency are the Chinese themselves, because then they cannot kind of, control their population through capital controls, and they want that more than the reserve status for their currency. So that's not going to happen. There's a reason why renminbi reserves are still quite low. The euro is what it is. BRICS, there's more conflict brewing there than people realize. And so, yeah, it is this crazy world that we find ourselves in. It's not Kansas anymore, like the saying goes, but you just have to come to terms with the fact that the market now has far less confidence in currencies in general than in the past. And you just kind of have to navigate that as best you can. But yeah, literally everything seems overbought because it is. But what are you going to do when the alternative is even worse, seeking refuge in currencies? In a nutshell, that's the picture I'm painting right now. And how you answer this question is, I guess, going to be up to you because nobody truly knows what the future holds. And those who claim otherwise, they're just lying.
Yeah, it's always a sobering exercise when I look at my portfolios and then I also check the USD versus euro chart, and you realize that it's down 15% since Trump took office. So yeah, it's all floating. Are you a gold guy as well? You said you like metals. Gold has had an incredible rally. Actually, Bitcoin is, I think, more or less flat versus gold over the past 4 years or so. I forget exactly what the time frame is, but like Bitcoin priced in gold terms is actually like pretty flat. And so, some people are using that as like an indication that Bitcoin is going to have more legs, being the beta to gold, and especially in this, rate cutting environment. But Renee, what's up, man? I see you joined us up here. Maybe I
Not
should.
much, just listening. Hey, Andre, how's it going? I've actually bought a lot of names off of you off of Name Pros in the past, so we've had some.
Oh yeah, I remember. I remember. You had Greek in your username. I think
I
now
do,
it came
yeah.
back. Okay, okay, yeah.
Interesting discussion. I just caught the last few minutes of this. I think basically different ways to look at the world, and it depends on your own goals and aspirations. And if you have a family and I have a family, where you're on your life. But right now you have 401ks, markets at all time highs. So anything you picked in the last couple of years has gone up like crazy. Just you could throw a dart at the wall and you're probably up a lot. But conversely, the middle class groceries are expensive, inflation's here. So you have two different spectrums. Tech companies are flush with cash. Their capex is 500 billion next year for data centers and energy, and that's the biggest thing right now is that the market's being driven by the huge companies and all this, capex, and people are throwing tons of money at AI. But most people don't realize that we don't even have number one upgraded infrastructure that hasn't been touched in 25 years for the grid. Number two, these take a long time to build these data centers and these plants and energy. We don't even have enough right now just for probably the builds through the end of next year, or maybe 2027. And then no builds are going right now. No new plants are coming online. Now they're starting to break ground in some places in Texas, but that's a bigger concern. So it looks like it's smooth sailing for the next year to 18 months. But then when you don't have enough energy, and you start having to pull from local communities and stuff like that, and then their electric bills go through the roof, there's gonna be a lot of pushback. So I think we're constrained by the energy. Forget about inferencing and all the other stuff like that, and chips, and all the other stuff as well. There's just so many moving parts that, yeah, it sounds great. And these tech companies are so flush with cash that, what's 50 billion, 100 billion? They got hundreds of billions on their balance sheet. So and they just print money basically because their profit margins are historically levels that we haven't seen in a long time. If you go back to 2000, they were not nearly nowhere near this level. So yes, the more stocks are maybe overvalued, but relative to the cash flow and the balance sheets and everything like that, these companies are very strong and stable. So it just depends. So everyone can say about, this is my own opinion. I have a background in finance. I have a degree in finance, and so this is just my own anecdotal opinion. But I think it depends what field you're in, what jobs you're working in, what your goals are, where you're at in life. If you have family, kids, but a lot of I also work in financing for asset to like equipment, land projects for building. And right now, a lot of small businesses, it's just expensive with insurance and the supply chains, and the tariffs are a little bit uncertain for some of the goods that they're using for the project. So a lot of this stuff flows downstream where these big tech companies, they have so many ways to either, onshore or even, pay lower tariffs or make deals with the government. Like iPhones are excluded from the tariffs, right? That's huge. That's Apple's biggest product, right? So it's an interesting world out there. But I think back to domains, I just think that there's just so much capital out there, and as the market goes up and up and up, and people want to diversify away, or they want to seek different asset classes. Domains are still so immature and intense sense of them been around for that long relative to other things that have been out there. So it's just an interesting dynamic where I start to see now businesses are realizing the power of domains, but it's a long educational slash learning curve that I don't know who's really going to take that up to try to educate the end users and, make it, I don't know, it's a, like domaining is a beautiful thing and it's very difficult. It's very, very hard. And I'm still learning and getting better every day. But it's like at the end of the day, there's always that sweet spot for names from 1,500 to 5,000 where people will take a flyer on it, they'll buy it, they'll say they want to build a business and I hope it works out for them. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it's not going to, break the bank for them and they gave it a shot. When you start talking about these names that are 10, 50, 100 million dollars, that's a different level of investing and you have different buyer pools there. So I think, you have to be a lot more selective. But in that case, those higher end names, there's so much liquidity out there. And for people that want to start companies, startups, people that they're crypto rich and cash poor, they may be starting to, buy domain names to launch their own companies as they get, either bought out or they get, start their own ventures. So there's a lot of opportunity depending on what spectrum you're on in the domain world. But in terms of your barrier to entry, I want to disagree with that slightly. With these, even using your guys' own thing, the $5.coms, I mean, if you just spend a little bit of time, which this is the part that is the caveat, which 99% of people won't do, if you look at, Name Bio, DN Journal, Name Pros, all these forums, DNX, Josh has a good, he has spaces, Michael Seiger, even Keith O'Bear back in the day with Brandable podcast he had. There's just so many resources out there. It just comes down to the time and effort. And that's where the people trip up is that it's not so much a barrier to entry for capital perspective. If you're going to just start off with, let's say anybody knock on wood, just save $1,000. You can buy 200.coms for $5 a clip. Hand registrations, expired drops. If you spend a little bit of time studying, you could probably sell, for granted, maybe one at, $500 just to test or 250, whatever it is, just to get it going and go from there. Like I started with $1,000. Okay. That's all I had. And when I did this, but that was a couple years ago. But the point is, it's not even so much the capital, it's just the effort and the energy it takes. Most people, everybody wants things instantly now. So if they can't get a roadmap or a blueprint or make it easy for me, then they won't do it. That's the beauty for the people that want to put the effort in. That's your edge. All the time and energy and effort and resources and filters you have and places you find names, you dig under the rocks, private deals. That's where you make the money because that's the hard part. Buying the name and listing it to actually have it, that's just icing on the cake. You make the money in the buy. So and then pricing is obviously another dynamic, but generally speaking, it's when you find the names and when you buy them, that's kind of the most I think the hardest part. And the other parts are just more kind of nuances of if for price for cash flow or hold times or ROI or average sales price per bucket you're buying, so stuff like that. But
Do you
yeah,
think that's why we don't see any popular wholesale marketplaces is because as soon as you build a wholesale marketplace and everyone knows that that's where you go for deals, then all the edge is eroded and, then you're just competing, against every other domainer in one marketplace and you can't actually find those gems. It seems like, trying to catch quicksilver here, like plug holes in a leaky boat and then you just spring another leak. Domainers are always trying to be in the least competitive environment. You always want to be the only buyer for a name to get the lowest price in wholesale. And so, yeah, is this just like a cat and mouse game if you're trying to build a wholesale marketplace?
so when you say wholesale, I mean, I would argue that it depends if you're offloading, like if your names are expired and you're like GoDaddy auctions, those aren't they're flowing through names through their own registrar, other registrars as well that people can bid on, right? So I mean, if you get it for $1, I would argue that I mean, to some people that could be wholesale, right? I mean, so your term wholesale is, I think more of like if I have a name that's $1,000 and I want to dump it for $100 or $50, that's my idea of wholesale. So that's kind of, but at that point, right? I mean, there's channels on WhatsApp. There's a lot of places you can go to find people that need liquidity and need cash that have decent names, but it's a trust factor. You gotta, do your due diligence, obviously. But there's tons of people out there that want cash flow, that want to get rid of some names or bulk deals. Adam has a great place. You go to Adam Marketplace. They have a wholesale section where you can get access to. You can buy whole portfolios. You can buy discounted names. I mean, so I just think that it doesn't really matter. Even if I told you, hey, go to this one website, they have wholesale domains there. I mean, well, okay. I mean, it doesn't mean that just because that site has wholesale inventory that it's good or that it's valuable. So I don't think that it's so much an issue of, like there's people talk about edges, right? So there are edges, but if your edge is so lucrative or so profitable, you're going to want to mine that out first before other people figure it out. Or they will inevitably probably figure it out, or at least there will be more competition. And then at that point, you have to say, do I stick with it? Do I pay up more? Or do I find a different edge or a different angle? And that's the difference too. I mean, in domaining, it's very, I'm a baby in this, but you have to evolve and say what worked a year ago or 2 years ago still might work but does the math make sense? Auctions are getting expensive, or I used to be able to hand reg these with these prefix or this suffix, whatever it might be, and now these words are harder to find because they're on everybody's keyword list. So you got to really think outside the box. And I think alternative extensions. I'm just saying, like, like not the big, 4 or 5, excluding .com, AI network, etc. There's other opportunities with these new extensions that, you know what, maybe that's an area to explore. But again, I don't recommend people go to do that. Do your homework on it and before, because the renewals can be expensive. Some are premium, some aren't. But I think right now that, you know, there's just with AIs being priced so high right now, and the keyword, let's just say it's, like, for example, cloud AI for like 600 grand. If you don't have that in your budget and you want cloud in your name or something like that, you go down the list of IO, XYZ, all the other ones. I mean, you have to maybe start looking at other alternatives, GGSO, something like, depends what the industry is specifically, usually, depending on, it doesn't work for everything, but there's somewhere it might work like dot trading or dot live or dot bet, right? Or dot capital, stuff like that, that those are a little bit more, I think, untapped, but they're also way more risky because there it maybe isn't as much data to go off of if you're data driven, or you have to really only have it as a small percentage of your portfolio, test it out by maybe 50 names. And a lot of them have promo pricing for the first year. Like I get certain extensions where it's like 80% off for the first year, and then I'll buy a batch of 100 of them and see if it works and then go from there. And that's kind of things I'm trying to explore now. But again, that's not my bread and butter. I'm not putting all my eggs in that basket, but there's tons of ways to diversify away your own internal portfolio to where if your .coms are maybe slower or things, you can pick up a couple sales in .org or .net or whatever. There's value everywhere. And like Tony Name says, it's the best available, name at that time where you can allocate your capital towards. And, yeah, of course, .com is king, right? But, we all don't have, the level of in bankroll and, funds that some larger investors have where they can spend 5 figures on a name of wholesale and, wait to flip it for 10x. So until
Yeah.
you get there, you got to be creative.
Andre, you were mentioning name bio data. I think I saw net is like significantly lower this year. I think it lags behind IO even.
Yeah.
Is that what you saw as well?
The data says that at this point in time, over the past year or so, net is lower. Org has done relatively well. Org has done well. AI, as we know, has done remarkably well. To a certain extent, to the detriment of IO. But speaking of Tony, he recently sold Sigma.io for 100K. So there's also that. But by and large, yeah, that's kind of like the data is saying, to succinctly put it. Net down, org up, AI obviously up, to the detriment to a certain extent of IO, but there are plenty of good IO sales still. So as a snapshot, that's kind of how things stand. And in terms of your question as to why it's hard to have a domain marketplace, I think I can speak to this as someone who 15 years ago had an auction site for domains. I think it was a pretty cool concept. It was called auctionpuss.com, and octopus auction puss. It was an acute octopus with 8 tentacles, and each day it pointed to 8 auctions that I was organizing. Anyway, it seemed a good idea at the time. And I did sell. I had domains sell for 5 figures on the platform. It was a long time ago. So I think my highest sale was a oneword.com, something like that. So it worked. But the problem is that the fact that domaining is such a small industry tends to be a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you can, unlike all of these ultra uber competitive sectors, you can develop an edge for sure in domaining, but it's small. And what is a marketplace if not a community? And for the same reason why it's so difficult to have something like a domain forum do well, it's very difficult to have a domain marketplace do well, because domain investing is still such a small community. And the difficulties I faced with my auction platform is not that it didn't make money, it did, but I had to constantly promote it, So speaking of unstoppable domains, to draw a parallel, which I think we discussed that in the past as well, the real money I think for you guys is in having your landing pages locked down. By the way, I like the current landers; they're so good now compared to they're really good. So that's the money, because you can have big portfolio holders. They can come, they can switch over their business to your landers, and then you can get consistent revenue from there. And I wouldn't call it passive, but it's certainly a lot more passive than running a marketplace wholesale, where you kind of have to make sure that you keep people's interest active. And, for what a marketplace without adequate liquidity is useless. And to obtain that adequate liquidity is going to be such a difficult mission in a small industry like domaining, to keep a decent enough active user base, so to speak. So I think that for operations like you guys, for Unstoppable, having a good system for people to sell their domains through landing pages is kind of like a gold mine. Whereas something like an auction platform, you can try it, but it's going to be very difficult because of the community element. Like, I started so many projects over the years, and the trickiest by far are communities. If you give me money now and ask me to buy a website that somebody built, it would probably be a community, because I know how damn hard it is to get one off the ground and get it to stick and get it to kind of critical mass. And yeah, that's my take on it based on what I've been through.
Yeah. Well, you guys are on opposite sides of the wholesale marketplace. So Andre sells predominantly to other domainers, while Renee is predominantly buying from other domainers here, and oftentimes Andre. So like, there's a bit of a, you guys both want different things out of a wholesale marketplace. So Andre wants as many eyeballs on his listings as possible. So it is a bit of a conflict there. And that's true of any marketplace, of course. I'm curious how you think about that, Andre, and whether you like shop names around to different domainers, and what the culture is like of private DMs for finding these wholesale deals versus big group chats where there's more competition.
I think that fortunately for buyers, with the domain market being so small and liquid compared, there is this decent liquidity you can tap into. But as I've mentioned in my example with net inflows from Bitcoin ETFs, it's super illiquid compared to other markets. So chances are that if you're a buyer who's serious about accumulating inventory, you're going to have decent opportunities to do so. As a seller, and everyone watching us, whether you sell to end users or to wholesalers, can probably attest to the fact that probably the most frustrating thing about our industry is the inconsistency. You can have a bad week where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this week sucked so much and I would have needed some extra liquidity. And then the next week is just amazing with sales back to back. And you think domaining is the best industry in the history of mankind. And as a wholesaler, I see the exact same thing. My biggest deal to date was 800 domains sold to the same buyer the same day. So my single biggest deal was that 800 domains to a buyer. I keep in touch with him. He just sold one of them for 35, 60 or something like that. So I think he's quite happy with the purchase. So it's so frustrating. Sometimes I oftentimes have people who buy from me wholesalers at the higher end. They go through my 2,000 domains that I'm selling, and they pick one, and they don't mind paying me 70, 80, $90 for it. But at the same time, it's frustrating that you cannot really scale that. And so, it kind of becomes this balancing act between giving people the best deal you possibly can, especially since so much of my business relates to people who come back to buy from me. And you don't come back to buy from me if you're not happy with what you bought. So I want to give you a good deal. Then you give me liquidity. Then I use that liquidity across my other interests, whether they're online or offline, like the land I've been buying recently and whatnot. And in the end, even if, as Brady pointed out, it's a conflict of sorts in that, buyers want something, buyers want to buy at the cheapest possible price and as hush hush about it as possible. Sellers want to move their inventory, but in the end, especially in markets like ours, I think everyone can be satisfied. But I think buyers and sellers alike just have to come to terms with the inconsistency that's kind of unavoidable when you have a sector of the digital economy like domaining, which is not the most liquid place in the world.
Turn around and get sold retail pretty soon thereafter, or are you just content to have like the steady, more predictable income from wholesale? Like and that's just a preference, and that's the opportunity cost of having that preference.
Well, actually, I'm kind of the opposite of fuming, because if the domains don't sell to end users, then I don't have a business. To me, it's the ultimate compliment when one of my domains sells to an end user, whether I own it or somebody else owns it, because it proves that I know what I'm doing and that I'm not wasting my time here on the internet getting names that don't sell. Because at the end of the day, the prize, whether you're a wholesaler who sells to wholesalers who then sell to end users, or you just sell to end users yourself and never touch the wholesale market, at the end of the day, at the end of the cash register, if you want to say that, there has to be an end user. So personally, you know, I think it's very very good news. I keep in touch, especially with my big buyers. They have different time horizons. They can afford to price inventory higher than I do. They can afford to, a valid question to ask would be, but well, wait a second. Why don't you keep all of the domains and build a portfolio of, based on my methodology, as I mentioned last week, I can get, let's say, 10,000 domains per year. About that's it. Why don't I keep all of them? Well, then that becomes a question of just what risk tolerance you have. I already, like, as a guy who lives in Eastern Europe on a farm, I already have way more than I need. So the last thing I want is to be super stressed out by overextending myself too much, because if you have under 10,000 domains, then you can weather storms pretty well. Like, I don't know, a 2 year recession, let's say, or maybe something endogenous, something pertaining to the domain industry that makes, you have a bad year in terms of end user sales or two. That's not too difficult to weather of a storm if you have under 10,000 domains. But the more you have, the more difficult it's going to be for you to survive after, let's say, 2 bad years. And I'm always willing, and again, other people are different, but I'm always willing to accept making less money if it also means taking on less risk. But it's all in vain if I don't have my stress under control. So to me, it's a great deal. I make less money, but I have less stress. And my hypothesis is that by having less stress, I will live more years on this planet. So it's a trade off I'm more than happy to make. But other people, maybe they can take on risk without taking on stress. If you're sitting on a $10 million nest egg, so to speak, then you can take on a lot more risk than I can take on right now without you being super stressed out about it. Which is why I am rooting very strongly for a robust end user market. I love the fact that you have these options based on whatever works well for you to organize your life. You can take on exactly as much risk as you're comfortable taking on. You can allocate your money aggressively. You can allocate your money conservatively. And, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And as we can see, there are ways for everyone to make money, which I don't think there's much more you can want than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was
I totally agree. I know so many domainers who are in other parts of the world. I'm in the US where, if they make a sale for 1,000 USD, I mean, that's sometimes their rent in some parts of Europe is 500, $600 for a nice one-bedroom apartment somewhere in a decent city. So it's all perspective. Selling it for 200 bucks, 300 bucks. They do one or two of those a week. That's a good strategy for them. Some people don't want to outbound at all. So I think domaining is beautiful because one, you can do it from anywhere in the world. Number two is there's so many strategies that once you figure out what works for you or what makes sense for your goals, it's not even a money thing, it's a time thing. I can't I mean, if I had unlimited funds, I mean, I could be buying names all day that make sense that I could sell, but it's just that's the next thing I think that hopefully AI will help domainers is that maybe these some of these tasks we do or these the way we search our lists, maybe we can create an agent that'll basically go through and we kind of train it what we look for and just say, hey, based on my historical buying patterns, bring me X amount of names from today's list. That's what I'm focusing on now because time is my most difficult thing right now that I don't have enough of. It's not that I don't know what names I want to buy or where I want to buy them or how much I want to spend, but there's so many places. I mean, there's expired auctions, there's private deals. I get DMs all the time. There's drop catching. There's so many things. And, as domainers, it's a blessing and a curse. We have so many options that sometimes it's difficult to kind of stay in your one focus where you want to branch out, maybe diversify a little bit away to try a new strategy or a new way to find names. But it's like, you really got to make sure that you don't just start spinning your wheels and make sure that it's worth it for you to go down that path. Like, for example, drop catching, super complicated, right? There's tons of Registrars out there, tons of people that even build their own systems to catch names. And is it worth it to go spend all the time to look at these names and think you found the name, put an order in, and then someone else beats you by, a full back order or they put a higher discount order than you. I mean, so that's another angle too that people have to realize is that, there's different levels to this where, yeah, a lot of times the best names are won in auction and people overpay for them, but that's where they find them and that's where you get them. And if you can't have the contacts or don't have the networking to get them privately, then you're kind of reserved to auctions and auctions are expensive. So I think that's another thing too. Like when we have made some deals, and without giving any information away, I was trying to figure out how to pay him, and we figured out a way to make the transaction possible, and it all worked out. But I looked at his badge on or his name pros profile, and he'd been around for 15 years. I looked him up, and I did a little bit of due diligence just because I never worked with him before. But now, it was a great transaction. But I think that's another thing too is that if you're going to try these routes of finding names and like other forums and DMs, and you got to be really careful to make sure that you either know the person or know someone that could vouch for him, something like that, because you can get a little bit burned. And knock what hasn't happened to me, but that's one thing too, is that when you're looking for these diamonds in the rough, just make sure that one, it doesn't sound too good to be true, because it probably is. And then, also there's other ways too. You can, do an escrow if you want, but most of us buying wholesale, we don't want to run through 20, 30 names that we're paying, X amount of clip when it's not going to be a huge dollar amount through escrow. So I think that's an important thing too, is that your reputation is really important in this industry. It is a small niche, but if you start to burn bridges, or you start to do things that are not, I would say, ideal practices in the domain industry, that can hurt you in the long run. So, do keep your head down, focus, network, talk to people, try and buy as much names as you can that make sense for you, and you can. There's tons of opportunity out there.
So, Andre, do you keep some of the top end acquisitions that you get? Like, do you keep some of the better ones for yourself instead of selling them wholesale? And like, what heuristics do you use to tell yourself like, hey, this is worth waiting for that retail sale?
The answer is basically no, because again, it depends on how people do it. If some people like negotiating, I like pricing my inventory at buy and now prices. And when you price your inventory, people focus on the fact, and they're correct when saying that domains are one of a kind. But at a portfolio level, if you price your inventory, they do get commoditized to a certain extent. And so for me, how many times has it happened to people where the gems of your portfolios, in terms of what your favorites are, did not get enough action, and then you had random domain sales? Just to give you an example, I advertise my portfolios using a lot of landing pages. I have thatdomains.com, really great domains.com, and a bunch of others. No, I use that domains now, but I wanted to use Utopia domains. I thought it was a cool brand to split test, and I bought it. And then I forgot about it. And when I bulk edited my domains, it switched from my hosting, and I had added it to Afternic in bulk with a bunch of names as well. And lo and behold, it ended up being added to Afternic, and it sold for my price I have nowadays, 1765. And again, it was not the domain I bought to sell. It was literally a domain I bought because I wanted to build a landing page on it and kind of experiment a little bit. So there you have it. Personally, I just don't do it because I see it as a business. I see my domains as inventories that I can replenish by working hard. And I let people have a fair chance at picking through them. And even if I did keep my best ones, don't assume the difference would have been, oh my God, game changing. I have my methodology based on what as to what constitutes a good domain. Each day, I diligently go through lists and pick domains that, based on my methodology, make sense. Every day, I have domains I like more than others, but it doesn't mean I can be certain that they will sell. And at the end of the day, the only thing I can do is go through data. I have my portfolio, I have my big portfolio. Then I have what I can consider, once you have a big enough portfolio, you will have segments or mini portfolios within those portfolios for which it makes sense to analyze data separately. And just that's just the way it is. So from my perspective, of course, other people may have other opinions. I have domains, I pick domains, I put them on my wholesale landing pages, and I give people a fair shot at buying them. At the same time, the domains in question have my landing pages on them. I sell domains to end users, I sell to wholesalers. Everyone has a fair shot, and I basically sell to anyone who has money to give me, is how I like to think of it. But yeah, everyone gets a fair shot. I don't really keep names for myself unless maybe I have some plans for them. But even so, I gave you an example with Utopia that was sold even if I bought it for non-domaining reasons, for non-wholesales or end user selling reasons. I bought it to actually use it. So there you go.
Yeah. And Andre, to like double click on the wholesale market, I think we all kind of know we know the well-known domainers who are obviously famous for their retail sales. Are there like wholesale domainers as people in your model where you're selling mainly to other domainers? Are there domainers like that are fairly well known or that have like made an absolute killing kind of like quietly? I'm wondering if it's like if it's just like a different game where it's less flashy, but there's still plenty of money to be made, or whether it's just a kind of a different market altogether.
there are big wholesale domainers that everyone does know about, but they're especially active in the short domain space. Like we really should one of these days have a show about the short domain mania that kind of, especially the acute phase, which kind of peaked in late 2015 to early 2016, where I remember in a newsletter, I featured something like 100 domains. They were short domains in my newsletter. I featured them and I sent the newsletter, and it must have been 5 to 10 minutes at most that went by, and every last one of them was sold. It was just insane. It was a frenzy out there at the peak of it. So yeah, you had at that point, I had many people from China. Some of you watching, maybe you remember William from Dot Media, William Lin. He was very big on three-letter domains and short domains in general. Then you have the people who are active in the short domain space. You have Andrew Rosner, you have the players that everyone knows at this point. So I would say short domains are definitely by far the category of domains where the most activity is taking place and where it becomes easier to identify. People know who the big players are. There are, it's an industry where about which we can say that it's as close to being commoditized as domaining can get. But even in my little corner of the domain industry, at a portfolio level, I can make, I guess, similar claims. There aren't that many people, to be honest, who are doing what I'm doing, but it's also, I think it's also has to do with the fact that what I'm doing is really labor intensive. Okay. And so, as of a certain point, you need to understand what you're doing and what the nature of what you're doing is, and if it's a good fit for you. Because if you live in San Francisco or if you live in, I don't know, Beverly Hills, and it costs you millions of dollars to buy a house, then I don't think doing what I'm doing is the best approach in the world. But when you're someone like me, who, like, I have rental properties, I make about the average wage in my country just from renting out my properties. So technically, I could be retired. It wouldn't be an amazing retirement, but I could retire from that. And then I don't have any debt. And then I'm kind of in a situation where I really don't need to make that much money. And it's not that, to me, I'm not obsessed with making as much money as possible. I want to have the best life I possibly can. And I published 4 books, and I think in all of them, I've quoted studies which showed that really making more money only counts up until a certain point, and that point is a lot lower than you think. Now we have to adjust with inflation to get to today's values, but even with the cost of living crisis, you don't need to make your entire personality related to making money to have a good life for yourself, if that makes any sense. So that's why I do what I do, and that's why I think there aren't that many people who do what I do, because in many markets on this planet, it is what it is. We all live where we live, and we all have kind of like what Renee said. We all have our contexts and our personal situation going on. But yeah, for me, I do not need more than this. But I recognize that in other markets in this world where the cost of living is super high compared to the cost of living where I am, doing what I do wouldn't make any sense. Or you could try to do what I do, but for you to be able to make enough money for it to make sense within your cost of living framework where you live, you would probably have to charge too much for your inventory for that inventory to be attractive to wholesalers. So I think I'm in that Goldilocks zone where I have just the right expertise to pick good domains, where I live in just the right place in this world for me not to have a super high cost of living. Because all of those pieces are in place, I can kind of offer these domains at prices that, like in my example previously, leave more than enough profit on the table for the people who buy from me. That's my
Yeah,
best.
it's actually a fascinating point. Just like, I mean, in the US, we have a massive debate right now about immigration and, outsourcing jobs overseas to low cost foreign labor. In the same, and then, those low cost laborers basically outcompeting Americans for the jobs, whether it's even, well skilled labor via H-1Bs, or it's, low skilled laborers via farm visas and whatever else. You're basically seeing the same phenomenon in domaining, where people that live in a lower cost of living place who are willing to hustle harder and are, not their required margins are so much lower, they are going to sell and undercut you and outcompete, people in higher priced areas where they can't sell for the same low prices. And of course, it's not exactly the same because domains aren't exactly fungible, and so there's there's a little less liquidity there because the domain has to fit the use case perfectly. So it's not exact, but it is the exact same phenomenon. It's actually fascinating. I've never thought about that occurring in like an investing sense, only really in like a laboring sense.
Yeah, like for example, 9 out of 10 of my names, if I just looked at the private deals I've done, all come from ex-US sellers. So that to me was just interesting when I was speaking about that. Where, like he was just saying, I mean, that's another anecdotal point where it's like the economics in those countries at the price points I'm buying. I'll buy 30, 40 names at a clip, for 15, 20, 30, whatever it is, a name, and that makes sense for them there because of their cost of living. And in the US, I mean, it does not make any sense to do that in my opinion. So I think there's tons of channels on WhatsApp and Discord where people are trying to give away names of wholesale, and the majority of them are outside the U.S. Or on the flip side, I have some people who come to me that say, "Hey," they'll tell me, "I just hand registered this name at a special for $5 or whatever. You guys are dining out at 7. And they give me a list and they'll say $20, and I'll be all right because I like the name. They know what I like. I didn't see it for whatever reason that day or I wasn't around. So there's also examples like that where like people will bring names to me that they know and I know them, and yeah, I know they got it for 5 or 6, and they're doubling, they're tripling their money in an hour or a day, whatever it is. So it just depends on where you are and what makes sense for you. But there are a lot of people out there that will specialize in that place where they'll buy them. They have people that already lined up to buy them, like myself, and even at $20, it's a great value for me and for them. They got it for 6 or 7, and they're making, and I buy 20 of those or whatever at a time, and they're making a couple $100 just for doing what they love, looking for domains.
I see that country is a very strong theme here. So I would say, I don't know whether you guys know, but one of the most consistent and full-time domainers, Abdul Basit, has relocated to Malaysia.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that. And let me give you a bit of context, lah, basically. Country of origin and processing and the value chain. Okay. AirAsia.com, right? Sold for 2,000 ringgit with web hosting included. I don't
Sorry,
know
so
whether you know
say
the
the domain again.
Okay. AirAsia. You heard of
Air-
AirAsia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So AirAsia.com, a friend of mine sold it for 2,000 ringgit. You can look up how much the ringgit is worth, right? 2,000 ringgit with web hosting, which is very interesting because, a name like AirAsia, you don't think someone's going to start like a ceiling fan brand. You think they're going to start airline, right? But why
Right.
was it cheap? Okay. So the thing is, I want you all to think of the value chain because I'm kind of the opposite of Andre because I buy my names. I not going to go into the thousands because primarily 50% of them I want to develop. I use it as a networking point to find like-minded people that, okay, hey, like, wait, you got some cash, you got some what? Do you want to buy this domain? And then do you want to find a VC? Because, I mean, I come in from a bit of a separate mentality. Like, it took me 20 years to sell my first domain because in the sense I was like, what? You can sell them to other people? I thought it's just fun to own the internet, and you can build stuff on it. You get what I mean? That was my mentality, you know. And I learned a lot. I had hotarnail.com, like, Hotmail, but R and N. So I registered it specifically because I wanted to see what it did. And then what I did was I opened up all the mail ports and I got like 1,000 emails a day from China because they can't read the difference between R and the N and the X. It looks like a Chinese character to them, you know? Yeah. No, it's hilarious. But okay, I can say it because I don't even know Chinese myself. So they are looking at these English characters like I look at Chinese characters. I was raised not being able to speak Chinese or write Chinese, but that's another matter entirely, basically. So I would say that the best thing that y'all can do right now is form local clubs because the whole domainer association of Malaysia can fit in a van, lah. Okay. I mean, just letting you know, in what you all have here is really great in terms of there's a big global community and stuff like that, right? But I found it really awesome that a guy from Africa sold me passiveincomeMalaysia.com. I'm like, wow, you've been looking out like what we're doing here, huh? You get what I mean? That cultural exchange is really something, but at the same point, you want to strengthen your local names, like do you want to buy I don't know, NewYork.com from someone in Uganda or something like that. You get what I mean? I would start with the sense that do go for the names that you want to build or you want to sell to people that you like to work with. Because after the domain is sold, it's not necessarily the end of it. Like I had a venture about 10 years back, If I tell you the name, you can look them up in TechCrunch. I made it to TechCrunch because my domain expired and it redirected more than 80,000 blogs. So that was huge. It was a horrible, stressful time. But also, as a startup owner, I can tell you that, to see your domain grow up is amazing, basically. So I'm just
Do you
saying
have
that
a
basically,
strong? So you said Malaysia does not. Are you in Malaysia as well? Do you have a
I live in Malaysia. Yeah. Do I have a?
Do you have are there other strong communities there? I do find that yeah, there it doesn't feel like there's a lot of intersection between the Western, domaining community, which we have is predominantly on X and NamePros, and the Asian community.
Okay, but you got to look at your developers. When BAYC first came out, right, the Bored Ape Yacht Club, what was the first charitable donation that they donated to? They donated it to an East Malaysian orang utan refugee center. It's like to take care of orang utans in Malaysia, lah. Okay, it seems totally random. Like, why wouldn't they donate to Jane Goodell or something ape themed? But I can tell you, we have a lot of Web3 developers here that are not earning US salaries. But at the same time, also, we cannot imagine uprooting and living in San Francisco, because that's just crazy, and we have excellent healthcare here. So, that's another thing. But I feel that we could benefit a lot from traveling and we could benefit a lot from local clubs. Like what I really envy about the US is you guys have a strong sports team in every state, in every school. We don't have that, you know?
Yeah,
But what we do have is like raw talent, I'm actually doing a lot of work for US companies. You get what I mean? So maybe more than in my own time zone, even actually. That's why I can stay up with you guys. So just saying, I mean, I'm happy to share my whole list of names because some 50% I want to sell, 50% I want to develop. And I just want a networking point to meet people from to, start something. And just think beyond the initial sale, basically, because if you knew that your 4-letter domain name is going to become a stock ticker, that's your cue right there. That's your inside track.
no kidding.
You understand what I
Well,
mean?
it sounds like you need to start a Malaysian domainer club, Josh. I do know some Singaporean
No,
domainers.
we have one. We have one.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have one. We met up with like a lot of us have met up in person, and it's very different. Like meeting in person, and you all have the same cost of living, cost of what, and all that. And let's not forget the .com is the same in every currency. What's the price of the MYR com versus the USD com? Right, it's the same.
yeah. I
You
mean,
get what I mean? Yeah.
that AirAsia.com should not have sold for 2,000 ringgit. That's only $250. Or no, that's $500.
I know.
That is
Yeah,
insane.
but
Whoever sold that is a
true.
moron. But
Yeah, I know, but he has other hobbies like number plate collecting, owning properties in Australia. Domaining is one of his things. So he has his own game, lah. I know he's not an idiot, lah.
yeah, well,
For sure, I know he's
just
not
as
one,
we're saying,
So yeah.
it depends on the seller's nationality. It also depends on the buyer's nationality. That's why
Brady, can I
domainers
just change gears here for a second?
want nationality and IP address associated with every lead that they get, is because the clearing price is totally going to depend on who the buyer is as well as the seller. So it's a fascinating liquid thing that it's all a negotiation. What are you saying, Renee?
I just wanted to change gears for a second. Can you talk about like what's on your roadmap? Because I'm just trying with so many different things being innovated. I mean, daily with Spaceship and other places, and now I think domain names for Afnic might be an ultra premium marketplace. I mean, what is on your guys' roadmap to kind of? I mean, you're going up against everyone knows 800-pound gorillas, GoDaddy, but what's on your roadmap to kind of I mean, are you just going to play on the basis of we're 3% and that's kind of your flag in the ground, or what kind of value are you going to add to convince domainers to move their names over there? Because I mean, I don't know if it's anyone's ever going to topple GoDaddy's trust, that they're so strong in the industry, but kind of speak to that about if you don't mind, if you don't, what your guys' plans are, because it's getting pretty competitive. There's promos, it seems like every week for .coms now. Dine It Up, Pork Bun, Namebright, they had it last month, so kind of I think it's going to be kind of. Paige mentioned this a couple weeks ago, and it stuck with me. I think the .coms are really going to start to get, really aggressive on that first year promo pricing, for the registration. So I'm just kind of curious, At some point, if everybody comes down to, let's say, $6, $5, and you're at $5, I mean, the delta between, the 8 and 5 now is enough. But it would all else be equal, if it becomes the same, for argument's sake, or something like that. I mean, what's on your guys' roadmap to kind of help you guys stand out?
So first of all, on pricing, we are reassessing our pricing model right now. We will still likely have $5 Fridays for comms, which is going on right now, by the way. We will probably increase the standard transfer price. So right now, all transfers get 550 off across the board, and you can get around 360 transfers at that price, and then it goes, back to regular pricing after those 360 transfers. We want to make that simpler for people. So probably what will happen is it'll be a lower. It'll be less discount, but we'll also make it cheaper for you on renewal as well. And so the upfront price will be slightly higher, but our renewals be a little bit cheaper. So it'll net out to be similarly a similar amount of savings. So we will share more about that coming soon, but you should know that our current pricing model is not going to last forever. And so keep that in mind, and try to take advantage of it while you still can. And that also includes, the potentially the $5 every day for Domainer Club members. That may increase as well. So bottom line is, stay tuned for updates on our pricing going forward, and take advantage of that while you still can, because that's not going to last. Now, as for the rest of our roadmap, we've really been trailblazing and building a ton of stuff just to get the nuts and bolts of our registrar and marketplace up to speed. We still have some issues on reliability, on bulk search, on bulk updates, on making sure name server updates are fast. We have some polish to do on making your landers more configurable, making it super easy to list via CSV and make updates via CSV. All the kind of there's about 200 smallish features that all, one by one don't seem like a lot or all that important, but actually are pretty critical to making a nice, seamless, headache-free experience for people. And so we have a lot to do on that. So that's sort of the table stakes, is just getting the experience really robust and having all the bulk tools that you need to do everything in large quantities at Unstoppable. So that's sort of step one, and we're obviously working on that. Another thing, Josh pointed out to us today was, I mean, we've known it for a while, but Josh ran into this today, was, push is a little bit clunky at Unstoppable. So there's just a bunch of those little things. Now, beyond that, we are working on a bunch of other things. I'm not sure how much I can say exactly, but we've got to obviously polish up LTO, and we want to give you even more customizability and make it incentivized for people to pay off early, and so you get your money faster with LTO. We want to make our CETO integration a little bit nicer. We are looking into an after integration, obviously. And then, there's a couple of features around making that seamless to be able to list for sale on those reseller networks with just a couple of clicks, and keeping it nice and synced in your dashboard and Unstoppable. We also released listing for sale without transferring in. So you can list your domains at other registrars for sale at Unstoppable. And then you can, use our landers by forwarding from another registrar. And so there's a couple of follow-up tasks we need to do there. Right now, if the domain is not at Unstoppable, it can't do LTO, it can't do offers, it can only do buy it now and message inquiries. So we have to clean that up, and we have to make it much easier for you to be able to use our name servers externally. But for now, you can, forward to our listing pages instead and use those as your landers. So that is possible right now, but it needs to be cleaned up. Beyond that, I mean, there's a ton of stuff right there. We also have some, and people that are in the Domainer Club know this, but you have access to doing back orders and seeing expired domains being suggested to you inside of your dashboard at Unstoppable. We have some cleanup to do there to make that more seamless and to unify it with our regular search. Again, our back orders are completely free. We don't charge anything for that. It's not going to be as competitive as Dropcash because we don't have thousands of licenses, but the price is free. And for non-competitive names, it should be quite sufficient for picking up, back orders. So those of you in Domainer Club can get that. If you're not in Domainer Club and you think you should be, and you have a couple hundred names, DM me and we can get you added. What else? What else? I mean, there's advanced search. We have the Unstoppable bot, which is the custom GPT that I built. There's all sorts of products that we have in parallel that need cleaning up, and then there's some other extra special stuff that we can't reveal that we're also working on. So there's quite a bit to get to, but our overall goal is to make it basically on par with other registrars, Dynadot, Spaceship. There shouldn't be much switching costs quite soon to coming over to Unstoppable. You'll be in these reseller networks. You'll be able to manage seamlessly, and you'll have competitive pricing. And so we want to get to that level, and then obviously keep building and iterating and offering completely novel things. So that's more or less where we're at, and that'll take through the end of this year to check all those boxes and make things super robust. How's that, Renee? Any questions? Anything stick out to you?
No, that was good. I was just kind of was curious. I actually was registering some names today, and I noticed your tool. There just it was just expired drops, and your tool was suggesting other names that were also unregistered. And there's actually some pretty good ones there. So is that your own like algo, or what's feeding those listings that were populating, or not listings, but those names? There's like there's about 10 of them that would show up when I searched the name I was looking for. It would show available or not, and then at the bottom it would give me like a list of 10 that were all available to register. Where's that coming from? Is that like a custom wrapper or something with like a AI or something like that that just or how are you giving me those suggestions?
So this is in just regular search you're talking about, right? At the bottom of the search results page?
Yeah, so if I'm on your page and I just type in a name and it says it's available and it says, the discounted price $5 and then below it gives you other alternative, names in .com that are available for $5. Where are you getting that for? How do you aggregate how is that data coming up in the underneath that?
Yeah, so it's not AI based. It's just I'm not entirely sure, but it's just a heuristics based like dictionary lookup basically, and then we look
So it
at
was cool because I
similar
actually
names.
grabbed a few names that were in those suggestions actually. So
Oh,
it's kind of interesting. That's why I was asking. It was actually helpful because it was just I'm looking at the screen anyway. So do you scan takes a second. I was like, wait, I didn't. I'll take that for $5. And I bought more names from just seeing those suggestions for things that and they were all synchronous to what I was looking at. It wasn't like it was completely different. It was like my keyword and then the other suffix or vice versa. And I was like, okay, that is another name that's in the bucket I'm looking for anyway. So I thought it was pretty cool. That's what I was saying. I wasn't a criticism. I was asking you. That's a cool feature.
yeah, yeah. Well, we want to give far more, suggestions to people to make it easier to find domains that you like. The other feature I was mentioning is called our AI portfolio suggestions. So for those of you in the Domainer Club, if you go to your dashboard and you look literally the second tab down on your left sidebar, you'll see portfolio suggestions. And you can go in there and we basically look at all the keywords, all the SLDs in your portfolio, and then we'll scan through various other TLDs that you can configure. So if you like XYZ, if you don't like XYZ, if you like AI, if you don't like AI, or all any of the other ones, you can configure that, and then we'll take a look and pull the prices if they're registered or aftermarket or whatever for basically alternative extensions in SLDs that you already own. So that's another way that you can find suggestions within Unstoppable, and people like that. And there's also the back orders are also in this interface. So yeah, we're all about making it easier to find new domains. Have you used the Unstoppable bot, the custom GPT, Renee?
I have not yet.
Yeah,
I'm still trying to get your guys' platform. Kind of navigating my way around. The only reason I signed up like a couple weeks ago because I bought some names from a wholesaler, and he just bought them at the special, and I needed to get him push my Stoppable account, and it was needless to say not very intuitive at the beginning, but we talked about that, and I think it's going to be more intuitive going forward. I also do think that that the whole wallet, creating a wallet first before you do it, that's kind of it's no one
yeah,
else does that,
we're getting
so that's
we're
kind
getting
of
rid
just
of
like
that.
yeah, like a walkthrough of how that works. I mean, I figured it out,
We're gonna get
but
rid
yeah,
of that entirely. Don't worry.
yep. Okay, cool. Because that actually, by the way, in that deal, I bought like 30 names and there was 5 of them at Unstoppable. And I was like, you know what? I trust the guy. I don't even want to deal with it because it was just so not. It was I just rest Josh words. It was clunky, and I just was willing to actually not even take those names and take an off code. But then I said, no, let me, let me just look at it for 5 minutes. I got in there and I figured it out, and so it's all good. But I think going forward, that I'd be glad when you get that fixed, so it's just more seamless.
Yeah, absolutely. What's up, Amit? Welcome up.
Hey Brady, what's up?
Good man.
I just came up to ask, how do I add a back order? I go to the back order page, but I don't see anything to add back order.
Yeah, so you start back orders from the portfolio suggestions tab. I know it's clunky right now. We need to fix that and make it its own tab, basically. Yeah, so
Can you add an option to batch or add back orders from the drops, like manually?
from the drops, basically, I mean, we will eventually, but right now it's basically only if it shows up in your portfolio suggestions that we do that, unfortunately. And we know that's a problem. We're doing baby steps one at a time right now. So yeah, back orders are very, very primitive right now and not very flexible. So yeah,
And let's say if I catch a domain, so how do I pay for it? It should be prepaid or will an invoice be generated, something like that?
it'll just take the card on file if we do successfully grab it.
Cool. Thanks,
Yep.
man. Improve this, man. It's a great feature.
Yeah, yeah. I think the MVP here is just like let you search whatever domain, and then on the listing page for that domain, we'll say back order it if it is if it's currently registered or we see it's going to expire soon, something like that. But yeah, there's a lot to be done there. You pick anything up today, Amit?
Yeah, I picked a couple of domains. Nothing good.
Nothing good. Well, glad to hear our promo dollars are being well spent on your not good domains. Well, that's fine. I actually used the Unstoppable bot the other day. I was in Tulum in Mexico, and I picked up a couple. Just I told the custom chat GPT to ideate some Tulum domains and then check their availability in the top extensions. It's so easy to ask it to do these things and just look it up. Like it takes zero creativity on my part other than identifying the opportunity, which is like, hey, Tulum is like an up and coming vacation spot. Maybe there's some low hanging fruit domains here that I could tap into. And then yeah, basically, let's see what I picked up. TulumVillas.xyz, TulumTravelCo.com. So not amazing pickups, but for like a couple of bucks each, I'd take a stab at those. Yeah. Anyway, it's a novel way to search for domains. So always keen to hear feedback on that. Any other thoughts from you guys on the roadmap I just outlined? Andre, Amit, any ideas? Any thoughts? Any feedback?
Yeah, my number one suggestion, I think, for you guys would be to keep it as uncorporate as possible because I like the fact that kind of with the show we're doing and your presence in the domain space, generally speaking, you're branding yourself as the company probably that listens to domain investors the most right now. And even with other companies that, like Renee mentioned, other companies had promotions as well. Spaceship had $5.coms, but yet when people wanted to transfer a segment of them out, for example, they basically threatened to ban them from using the platform again and kind of bombarded them with a corporate sounding message, making them look like criminals or whatever, which is it's such bad form, you know? So there's a way to do discounts right. And I think you guys are doing discounts right. And there's a way to do discounts wrong, kind of like the spaceship approach. I think I had a couple hundred names. Yeah, I did have a couple hundred names at Spaceship as well, but I let the buyer, because I'm very familiar with the people who buy from me. I just handed over my login details to that account to the buyer and let him figure it out, and then he gives me the account back, and it's fine. So I didn't have to deal with it personally, but I saw several messages on X and in WhatsApp groups of people kind of being shamed by their registrar because they wanted to transfer some domains out. Maybe they're selling. Maybe the buyer doesn't want to. Maybe the buyer insists on having them transferred. It's, a wide range of reasons. So I would say keep your ethos because the number one thing I hate the most, it's why I hate PayPal. It's why I don't like big companies like GoDaddy. I hate corporate speak. I hate kind of being looked down upon because that's what corporate speak does in my view. And the best way to go is just keep on listening to domain investors and keep on being kind of like this domainer friendly company. Don't allow yourself to become corporate because then I have a lot of experience with YouTube as well. And so many YouTubers made it big, super big, because people liked their simple stuff. Like they like my videos on YouTube as well. And then once they became big, they started getting huge crews of people and everything became professional and they turned their business into a Hollywood-like production, and then they lost their popularity because people don't want Hollywood. People wanted the simple, regular guy YouTube. And the same principle, I think, is very valid here. People are so sick of corporate speak and all that nonsense that I think they find it refreshing for a company to have the approach that you guys have. And I would really, really urge you to just never change that aspect of the Unstoppable.
Yeah. Well, I am probably the least corporate person you'll meet. And anyone who's met me in person at one of these conferences can attest to that. So I continue to just, enjoy shooting the shit with you guys and coming out here. And I mean, I really do appreciate the domains industry, having gotten into it over the past year, because it does feel like a fraternity in a lot of ways. Like it's just a bunch of guys, passionate about this side hustle, shooting the shit, and anything goes. Everything's off the cuff. I mean, Todd's here in the audience. Todd is doing roast of the domain industry at NamesCon coming up next month. And I don't know, you don't see that at a lot of conferences. I think there's this really intimate feel that we should cherish and not throw out. Yeah. And so guys, if I ever turn corporate on you, please, roast me, ping me, excommunicate me, do something, because I really do think it is something that most of the companies in the space really lack, is like the personal touch and like the presence. And that's why I enjoy doing these things. And of course it's good for the work that I do at Unstoppable as well. All of these live streams that I do are excellent opportunities for me to collect feedback from you guys, keep my finger on the pulse of the sentiment of our users, and be able to ultimately deliver the best product to you guys down the road. So yeah, we'll preserve that culture, absolutely. One last thing, I know I have it in the title here. Have you guys seen the agent naming system that GoDaddy announced recently? It was pretty fascinating. I had a long post on it that I probably spent way too much time writing last night, but it's quite interesting. Have you guys taken a look?
I have not. I heard about it, but I'm looking at it now. Actually, that you mentioned it, but
Yeah.
I'm reading it. But
I'll pin it to the space here, but let me give you the gist. Here, let me share it first of all. So yeah, GoDaddy came out with this. So basically, GoDaddy's thesis here is that agents are going to need their own naming system. Agents are already, fairly popular, and I go through this in the post in my thread, but ChatGPT is an agent. Like the word agent sounds scary and fancy and very forward looking, but agents are already here, and we use it to refer to basically any AI tool that can perform actions on your behalf. So ChatGPT itself is an agent. ChatGPT can search the web. It can spin up a literal computer use agent, which can, take your password and email and log into a website and do any number of tasks for you. It can run code in its own interpreter, which you can use to connect to other APIs. And so, ChatGPT itself, the Unstoppable bot, is an agent of sorts. It'll, ping the API to check for domain availability and pricing, and then it can refer you back to our cart. Basically, agents are much more common than people would like to think they are, because the definition of agent is quite loose. So bottom line is, there is a lot of agent activity happening on the internet right now. The underlying problem there is, how do you authenticate agents? How do you understand who this agent is, who is behind it? Can it be trusted? Where do I go for recourse, or how do I learn more about this agent? It is a real problem. We solve this problem currently with things like, headers and robots.txt files for crawlers. And obviously, domains play a role in identification of various, websites on the internet. But agents are kind of this new thing. They're not quite a company. They're not quite a server. They're, so a domain doesn't really fit. A human name doesn't quite fit, right? Like they're not totally their owner. So there is a real issue here, where we've basically invented this new like species of user on the internet, and we need a way of organizing and identifying these operators. So basically, GoDaddy's proposal is to create a parallel naming system to the DNS. It will still be like it not blockchain based, so it'll still use a lot of the underlying infrastructure, But basically, you have an agent naming system similar to the DNS, except instead of records to associate IP addresses with the domain name, you'll have an MCP address, MCP being the Model Context Protocol, which is the golden standard protocol for these agents to communicate. Maybe I should slow down a bit. It's not going to help if I jump the gun on this analogy. But an MCP server is basically an API wrapper that makes it very easy and standardized for an LLM to talk to an API. So, for example, like for my Unstoppable bot example, right? The LLM is the custom GPT, and the API it wants to talk to needs to deliver the availability and the pricing of various domains that you want to look up. And then MCP is just some glue in between that makes it easy for that API to talk to the ChatGPT and vice versa. So it sounds complicated. It's not. It's really just like a little extra fluff around an API to make things standardized. But these MCPs are becoming the gold standard, and now you see things like mcpmarket.com, which basically has a large directory of various MCP servers. Read that as APIs that you can connect to. So whether you want to do text to speech translation, or whether you want to do, look up sports scores or what have you, there's an MCP for that. And then if you're building an LLM product, you can choose from any one of these MPC servers and connect to their APIs very easily. So that's what an MCP is. It's just a wrapper around an API. It's nothing too fancy, but it is the gold standard for how LLMs are tapping in and basically using agents. And of course, if someone has built an agent fully fledged end to end, they can offer that up as an MCP server as well. So you could have an MCP server that goes and does computation for you, goes and looks up and provides a research report, and then spits it back to you over the MCP connection. So that's what an MCP is. You can think of it as, in this analog we're going to use with DNS, MCP is like the IP, Internet Protocol. So it's like the connection that is used between various agents to talk to other parts of the internet. Just like a user uses IP to communicate with various servers on the internet, agents are using these MCP servers. So, all right, let's get back to our analogy here. So in the DNS world, we have users communicating with domains and their underlying servers via IP, and then we have the domain name system providing names associated with IP addresses, and all sorts of certificates are issued using the domain as the underlying identity. So things like SSL certificates, TSL certificates, email certificates, all of those use domain names as the underlying identity. And then basically you generate a certificate that shows that you do indeed own that domain. And that provides third parties, when they're looking at that certificate, they can trust that your traffic is encrypted. They can trust that your email is indeed coming from the email and the domain that it says it's coming from. And these are all like core primitives to internet security that are built on the backs of domain names as the core piece of identity. So just a little precursor history to how a lot of this identification is done currently. Now, in an agent world, GoDaddy is basically proposing that they build a new naming system, this agent naming system, ANS, which would be parallel to the DNS. And instead of A records and associating an IP address with a domain name, there you can associate an MCP address with an agent name. So again, the MCP is basically the underlying address that you can interact with an agent from, and then you slap a human readable name on top of that, because the MCP address is long and unreadable and not very brandable. So it's solving the same exact problem. We want to name those MCP addresses with a nice name. And then because you've done that, you can use a lot of the same underlying infrastructure that DNS domains use, and you can allow people to issue certificates on top of that MCP address. And so similar to SSL and TLS and the email certificates that we mentioned earlier, you'd be able to issue certificates verifying that indeed the person that owns this MCP server is actually the person at this domain. And so again, you're tying back identity of these agents to a domain name via encryption and these certificates. So that was a really long-winded analogy, but I hope that makes sense. And the bottom line is that they are trying to use domains as the underlying identity for these various agents. And so they've created a new naming system to accomplish that. Now, that's not the only way you could do this. Of course, you could do this right now without any extra effort with basically a text record associated with your domain. So you could, when you make an MCP server, it could require that just like you do with Cedo and Afrinic and other marketplaces, could require that you go submit this text record and associate it with your domain name to prove that you do indeed own that domain name. And so you could do that already. So there's other approaches to solving this problem that don't require a fully parallel naming system. But of course, I think GoDaddy obviously has some incentive to create this new infrastructure and own it and be able to monetize it. So that probably motivates those design choices. So yeah, that's a little bit about the agent naming system. It's an interesting take. If you read my thread, I go through why I think it's probably not the long-term solution that people want. Obviously, at Unstoppable, we're a bit biased towards blockchain naming systems, and the reasons for that are just because they're open source. They don't have the bureaucracy and the slowness that is, you know, pervasive in the domain name system because of silly things like the 60-day transfer lock, and GTLDs only have a round every 14 years or something like that. There's just a lot of slowness and bureaucracy that's involved because it's such a heavily regulated industry, and it is a military asset at the end of the day. The DNS was spun out of ARPANET back in the day. If there's an AI arms race with China, you can best believe that the DNS will be, utterly hijacked for political reasons, and you could expect a lot of censorship if the leadership thinks that it's worth it for the cause. So there's and then beyond that, there's just a lot of network effects of having capital and code and agent activity happening on chain, which it already is. We see Stripe launching a stablecoin. We see Cloudflare launching a stablecoin. We see all of these various players seeing that crypto is just a more frictionless way to move money around, and it seems inevitable that naming systems will also come around to that conclusion eventually. So again, I don't want to get anyone thinking that we're going to get into the agent naming space anytime soon. That's not on our roadmap, but it is something we're thinking about and watching, and it'll be interesting to see what unfolds here with GoDaddy. Yeah. So, any other thoughts, guys, on the agent naming system and some of the things coming out there?
Yeah, interesting thing. I just wanted to ask, will people need to remember the agent domains or agent naming system, or will it be just machine to machine talk?
Yeah, it really depends on how integrated it is. Like, and again, I don't know the specifics. I don't want to misspeak on GoDaddy's behalf here. But basically, like, I mean, I have my doubts that it'll even be integrated into something like ChatGPT or into like MCP properly. But my understanding is they would give human readable names, but really it would be more of like invisible infrastructure, right? Like just basically being able to verify that a certain domain owns a certain MCP connection. Like that's really what it's going to amount to. It's not going to be like this first class thing that users are going to type in to their browser or something like that. It's really going to be like a little verification badge that says, hey, this agent is owned by this domain. That's basically what all this amounts to.
So basically, a 64-letter hex code can work.
Yeah, I don't know why you would want to use that. Of course, you would want to use something. I'm not sure
I think
in what context you mean, but
if it's machine to machine contact, like an agent visiting the website doing the stuff for you, but the website doesn't need to remember the name. It can have it in database. It can check it.
yeah.
It won't. It will be an invisible infrastructure, in my opinion, because then if people don't need to learn those names or remember those names, it doesn't matter. It could be a hex code.
Well, that's what the MCP address already is. It's this long URI basically that is not very human readable. So the point is to attach a domain to that to make it more readable. So yeah,
Cool. Let's see how it goes.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, again, like ChatGPT is serving as basically the naming aficionados in their ecosystem, right? Like they don't have much of a use for this. They can already, require you to KYC if you want to deploy an a custom GPT that actually does commerce or does something consequential, right? So they can because they are, a siloed platform, they can, they can provide their own solutions to trust and identity for these various agents, right? Because they have a lot of access to all that data. They can force you to do various things. GoDaddy here is taking more of a Web 1 approach, which is commendable, of using open protocols, baking this into sort of the lowest level infrastructure of the internet, such that it's not completely siloed inside of either AWS or Google Cloud or ChatGPT. So it is commendable, but we think the Web3 approach is more modern and much more flexible and involves monetization and capital much more readily. So yeah, the key thing to think about here is like analogizing it to social media handles. Like social media handles have completely outcompeted like domains as personal identifiers. Of course, companies use domains very, like that's the gold standard there for branding and hosting your website and doing commerce. But for individuals, really, if you're going to identify yourself to someone, you're going to share your Instagram or your Twitter or your name pros handle, even, right? Domains really got outcompeted there on the personal identity front. And it's because these social media networks have such strong network effects. They have, really intense feedback loops of generating content and then people being there to enjoy the content. And then, of course, bringing your friends in and sending messages there. And so contrast that to domains and email, for example, you don't have such strong loops. You don't have such strong, like product development around those open protocols that really constituted a lot of the infrastructure from Web 1. So point being, GoDaddy's competition here will be the ChatGPT, like the closed ecosystems of ChatGPT, of AWS, and of Google Cloud, who are all offering their own agent stores, basically. And so it'll be interesting to watch it play out. Obviously, more open systems are good for competition. They're good for switching costs. They're good for consumers ultimately. But the internet giants are going to try their damnedest to capture it for themselves. So GoDaddy's fighting a good fight here, and we will see how it plays out.
So does that mean that the whole domainnames.com everybody was thinking is going to be a high end platform like Adam? That's not what it's going to be for. Basically, is that what we're
Say,
talking about?
say again? I don't understand.
Everyone was thinking that the domainnames.com from GoDaddy, are they using this, what you're talking about, on that domain? That's what they're going to do, right? Everybody was saying that it was going to be a domain high end premium platform, but that's not the case, right? It's going to be for this.
I don't know domainnames.com. I'm looking it up right now.
Oh, okay, it's from GoDaddy. I thought that what you're talking about is what they're launching that ANS on that name. Never mind. Maybe I conflicting two different things. I saw something this morning that was
Is,
domainnames.com from GoDaddy.
is domainnames.com from GoDaddy? It just says a coming soon landing page.
Well, yeah, you could tell at the bottom with the footer. That's standard on all GoDaddy pages. It has like the whatever it's called. You know, what I'm talking about like the little footer.
I
It's
don't
on all
see the
GoDaddy.
footer. I don't see the footer. Interesting. Do you think it's going to be like an Atom style curated marketplace, something like that?
I thought what you were talking about is what they're launching on that service, but obviously I was mistaken. So that's why I was asking. I was confusing because there's two different things. I thought you were talking about what you're talking about now, but I thought GoDaddy was going to launch that ANS whatever service on that name. But I guess they're probably going to have their own platform. I was just curious if anyone knows or if that's what it was. Do you see what I'm asking? Where I'm confused?
Yeah, no, this is completely separate. I really doubt the agent
That's
name
what I was
system
gonna say.
would
I was like,
launch on
wow,
that
they're really gonna
domain.
do it on that name. That's interesting. Okay, never mind. So okay, but yeah, we'll see what this is gonna be. I think it's gonna be a high end premium platform.
I bet. I mean, just looking at the diamond logo and the
Yep.
the logo. Let's see. I see Yusuf announced this earlier. I mean, after Nick just like posted the domain and then nothing else. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, we've seen after Nick launch, we've seen Dynadot launch their little toy Atom-like curated marketplace. Obviously, Spaceship has something. Does Spaceship do like logos generated for the names and things like that? Does it look like an Atom marketplace?
Nope.
No? Okay. And then someone else, I mean, yeah, obviously every Atom seller storefront has its own interface and search. So I would not be surprised if it is that kind of premium experience. I mean, I for one think it's a mistake. I don't think like if you want to provide the Atom experience boils down to especially like tech oriented startup people, a nice curated marketplace of like medium end names. Like they don't want garbage. They don't want to be catered to like an SMB that has a budget of $200 on a domain. Like these guys have a budget of 10,000. So they don't want to be sold like the cheapest bullshit that'll get you in the door like GoDaddy does. But doing it in an entirely separate domain feels really convoluted and weird, and like you're not going to get a lot of distribution on that new domain. It's like you have a search path, you have a reg path, just make it easier for those people in the reg path. But I shouldn't tell my competition what they're doing wrong. I should let them make the mistakes for themselves.
Can I ask you a simple question about crypto on your platform? Like, if I want to sell a name and I have a lead and somebody wants to pay in crypto, right? I assume that you can handle those transactions, obviously. But what does like the settlement look like? Because, for example, Bitcoin's up like, I don't know, $3,000 or whatever, a couple percent today, right? What does that look like? Is it when the name gets completely transferred, then whatever? Like, how does that work?
So basically, once the like we do not hold your assets in a crypto. Like if a payment is made in crypto, it is converted to USD when we get receipt of it. And so it's completely
Oh, okay.
stable. Like there's very little like, volatility risk that you take on. And then in terms of payouts, the same thing is true. It's like we will basically tell you when we'll pay you out, and like we only convert the USD value to the Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever you want at the time of payout. And so it's totally up to you whether you want to keep it in that currency or convert it back to USD or whatever. And so that's totally up to you. And I need to look into exactly how long it takes to pay out. But I have heard horror stories that like, people got their Bitcoin payout, but it took like a day or two to actually receive it. And then that time they lost $1,000 or something. So obviously we're attuned to horror stories like that, and we're going to make sure that the latency is really fast so that you're not taking on any risk.
Hey, do you mind if I chime in regards to like the marketplace thing?
Yeah, let's hear it, Josh. Welcome up.
What's up, guys? So Spaceship do have a like marketplace type thing. It's called Brand Store.
That's right. I thought so.
So that's similar to the Dynadot one and Atom and Brand Bucket, that kind of thing. In regards to domain names.com, I don't think that their intention is to create an Atom-like product, but I think they do want to build something that might be similar to the type of names that you're seeing on Atom's ultra premium marketplace, the UPM, which I don't know, I don't work at GoDaddy, so I don't know what they're thinking, but if it were me and I was GoDaddy, I would be probably somewhat upset with myself that I've let so many, very high end names go over to UPM when, to be honest, it wouldn't be, I don't think it would be that hard for a GoDaddy to be taking on those type of names with their kind of brand and network and marketing reach. So I think that that's probably what they're thinking about. I don't think you'll see like for 99.9999% of us domainers that don't have like super elite domain names, I don't think it will be anything for us to be too excited about. That's my opinion.
Yeah, interesting to hear. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like it seems like a total whiff on GoDaddy's part to not have this Atom use case and capture that customer segment inside of their reg path. I mean, they do have the AI search inside GoDaddy. I'm dubious of how much use that it gets. It's not all that great. I think Atoms is better. and they've only had it out for a month or two maybe. And yeah, I mean, it just feels nicer. It feels like they're not when you go to Atom or these Dynadot sites, it feels like they're not jamming it down your throat like they are at GoDaddy. I mean, what do you think the magic is here, Josh? Is it do the logos really matter all that much? Do you think that's like makes the people feel warm and fuzzy? Do you think like the curation aspect makes a huge difference? Like why are we seeing all these Atom copycats? Or is it like are they reading the room wrong? Like are they thinking that hey, everyone's moving to Atom, we just need to copy their UI, when in fact like the magic of Atom is the ad retargeting and the curation, and they're just like totally misreading why people like Atom.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I have my own theories that I'm fairly sure of. But if I could, without giving too much away, I guess I would say I think a lot of these places are reading the room wrong in a lot of respects. I think that Atom have read the room right in a lot of ways. Copying their UI and adding logos and whatnot is not why that's not why they're successful, right? They're not successful because they copied Brand Bucket, right? Because Brand Bucket was doing this a long time ago. And as we all know, they're not really doing as well as they used to, and they're certainly not doing as well as Atom. But, you know, to put it super simply, the best thing that you can do is connect and and this sounds so obvious, right? It's like you're trying to connect the right buyer with the right seller or the right name. And in order to do that, there needs to be a lot of the time options, right? So like GoDaddy have got it completely mastered in terms of like you want a specific name, go to GoDaddy and you can get it. Right? But that's not I don't think that that's the entire market, and I actually think that progressively things are shifting more towards a different approach when naming. There's definitely a larger segment of people that are saying, "Okay, I want to start a company and I want to look at what's available." While before it was like, "Okay, I want to start a company. Name like what name do I want to call it? Okay, I want to call it this. Let me go and find that name." But again, you know, I'm GoDaddy right here with domainnames.com. They're saying like, how has Atom got such a massive portion of like the high end market, right? Because that's not what they were focused on before, and it hasn't taken them a long time to build that UPM marketplace up. If you're seeing multiple seven-figure deals getting done on there pretty frequently, to be honest, that's a lot of money being made. There's a lot of commission being made on those deals. So I think this is GoDaddy saying we want a piece of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to double click on what you just said, which was this change in user behavior from them having the exact name in mind originally and saying, I'm going to go get that name, versus this new pattern you're seeing of, I want to be suggested names. I want a naming competition. I want an AI suggestion tool. I want, to take part in the discovery process, and I'm suggestible for names. Like, let's think about that. Do you think that is a function of like leaning towards brandables more, like brandables being so popular and like brandables being a little bit more difficult to nail down in your head, and like there being just such a massive space of brandable names that are not obvious because they're made up in a lot of ways? Or do you think there's like other, or do you think it's just like the end result is a better name if you can have more options, if you can be suggested, and like the AI tools are getting better? Like, what do you think lends to this different user behavior in wanting to be suggested names like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think year over year, the average internet user is becoming more and more tech savvy, right? So, AI has definitely helped accelerate that in a pretty meaningful way. But, just in general, every year there are new products, new tools that come out. The average user, has grown up on the internet. They're just more savvy about not only domains, but tech in general. And I think that you can look at that on multiple levels, right? You can say, okay, like now we're starting to see new GTLDs get adopted a little bit more. And, and I think that naming a company also has evolved because of these things, right? It's evolved in a way where people realize that they're probably going to be able to get that domain names are important, B, that they typically cost money, and C, that if you don't box yourself into a name right off the get go, and instead go in with an open mind, you're more likely to get a better name and a better brand by going out and looking what's on the market as opposed to just going and trying to find a specific name. Uh, you know, Companies like Atom, like Brand Bucket, have helped with that user behavior, but there's no doubt that it's going that direction, and it will continue to go that direction.
Yeah. I mean, the dominance of brandables continues to be very strong. And I mean, just from a personal note, like if I were naming a company today, it would almost assuredly be a brandable. I think you can like there's just so much taste that's conferred when you use a brandable.
When you say brandable, do you mean like a made up name?
Not necessarily. It could be like a one word or something like that that is not taken literally, or a word in a different language like termina or something like that for something tech related. It could be. There's a whole cloud of various flavors of brandables. But I would almost certainly like look for a brandable if I were going to try to brand my company, just because there's so much emotional charge that you can deliver with a brandable, and class and style and grace that you can embed into your name, rather than something more explicit, or even like two keywords like a adjective plus a consultancy or VC or whatever. I just think it like exudes style in a way that modern people and like especially young tech founders really appreciate. So I mean, Josh, how do you see like the evolution of the brandables market, and how are you positioning yourself accordingly?
That's a tough one. So brandables, I think that everyone has kind of like, first of all, a little bit of a different like definition of what a brandable name is and what it isn't. So like, first of all, like if I called my company Bloom Health, would you consider that a brandable?
Yeah, that was like the last category that I mentioned, right? Like keyword plus another like adjective plus keyword. But yeah, it's a brandable.
Yeah, you would. Okay.
You would know better than I do. So whatever taxonomy you want to use, just run with that.
Yeah, I mean, like, so like a lot of people will say that a brandable is like the kind of like a made up name, like Cordaxo or something, you know. You know, for me, I think a brandable is pretty much any good domain name these days. Like, there are very few non-brandable domain names that are super valuable. It's only like the best of the best.
Right.
So
So okay. So maybe I'm misusing the word brandable. Like, so you mean brandable? Usually, when people say brandable, they mean like a made up word. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, some people do, but that's not how I would use it. I mean, I think that a brandable domain name is basically the entire market, in my opinion. If
Yeah.
unless it's like computerdesks.com, right? That would be not that wouldn't be a brandable name, but also like it's also not a very good. It's not just like not that great of a name. Like there's not much demand for that type of name, you know. So like for me, domaining in general is pretty much focused around brandable domains. I don't know what do you think you have?
I think Tony names and I have the same mindset where he says that's all he sells is brandables. Every name basically is a brandable to an extent. I mean, so I think that a lot of people just Adam brand bucket. They're like, yeah, brandables, and they think it like it's been like I think it's like an old school way of thinking where they think like five or six of their names that are misspelled, or like for example your TIGR right .com. Most people, if you ask 20 people, is that a brandable? They're gonna be like, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly, but, like, it's in the sense, it's like, it's a different meaning behind it where sometimes I think most people just say, "Oh, yeah, that's 5 letters," it's 1 letter's missing, or they put a C for a K, or it's kinda pronounceable, it's a brandable, right? It's made up. But, like, that's not that's like a lazy way of doing it, or like a closed-minded way of thinking about it. I would think that most names are majority of the names that we sell are brandable, but there are some that are like, I would say like exact match, or like a geo, right? That's not a brandable, or like what you said, like computer desk, or like something that's like that you're gonna buy at like a store, like like furniture chairs or something like that, where
yeah.
it's brandable, but it's not that. So I think a lot of people do miscategorize it in the sense that it's just easier and maybe old school thinking of, oh yeah, it's 5, 6 letters, 7 letters, no one's really called that, so it's just a brandable.
Yeah.
or that's the yeah. So that's kind of
Yeah,
where I'm at with
it's
that.
probably too generic a term. I mean, even DNX is a brandable in some sense, right? But we have its own category, a three letter.
Like, for example, a name that I bought recently with a partner would be like keepmoving.com. Like, that's a brandable, that's totally a brandable. For me, anything that can be used for something other than like exactly what the keyword states,
Yeah,
that's a brandable.
non-literal.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, Josh, tell us about. You mentioned you registered what 1,000 names last $5 Friday, or was it during the $4 flash sale? Tell us about some of your pickups, and then I saw you had a sale at Spaceship, or a sale is pending. So, tell us more about what you got up there.
Yeah, that one was transferred and paid and, paid out. So Spaceship, first and foremost, did a really good job. They're really fast. And yeah, it was using an afternick lander. Someone made an offer through Spaceship, I guess through like the reg path, and it was like offer, counter offer, and he countered it again, and then I accepted and was within a pretty close range of what the buy it now price was, which was 2,995. But yeah, that was one of the names that I picked up for $4 in your recent promotion on Unstoppable Domains. That was, I think that was my first time testing and using Unstoppable. So yeah, I mean, I said to a lot of people, I was like, at $4, I'm going to get pretty loosey goosey with this because I just feel like, yeah, you can there's just a lot of wiggle room, right? And then that's obviously pretty obvious now that
Did you just
with
have a backlog of that many names ready to go, and then depending on the price point, you dig deeper and deeper into that list?
well, yeah, kind of going deep. Yeah, I went a little deeper into a list than I would usually go, purely based on the fact that it was $4 rather than 10. That makes a difference with how deep I go for sure. But yeah, I mean, I don't have like a list of names that I have just ready to hand register. When you guys did the promo, I spent a couple hours just mining a list based on keywords, and I think I already talked about this, so none of it is a secret. I did like 750 or so finance names, and blanketfinance.com was one of them. And yeah, obviously nice to get a sale within the first 30 days or so. But yeah, I mean, like there, I'll be honest. If I had the time, I could register another 1,000 probably tomorrow. So yeah,
That's what
Yeah.
I was talking about earlier, Brady, was that like it's time. And I don't know if Josh heard earlier when I was talking, but it's about your how much time we have. And that's what none of us have is enough. I mean, me anyway. I mean, I don't know I can't speak for Josh, but it's just time and like do like I told him like the other day, you could register there's so many names out there every day in different verticals, expired, hand registrations. I mean, it's how do you figure out where to maximize your time? And for me personally, I do the same thing he's doing, not to quite to that scale, but I'll do like 3 or 400 names at a clip, but I do them like maybe once every so often because you can't focus on that every single day because there's so many other things for me to look at. So it's kind of one of those like I have a list and sort of, but then I go through and then I'll be like, you know what, today I'm going to do 200 of them. Then I'll do the bulk search, put and pay for them, stuff like that. And then you got to go list them all. You got to do all the name servers. So it's kind of one of those. I think maybe I don't know how you do it, Josh, but it's one of those where it's not an exercise to do every single day because it's just
yeah. I mean, it took me a little longer than I wanted because the bulk registering and Unstoppable wasn't great at that time, but it's much better now. But it took me
Watch
it
it.
took me like
No, no, no.
maybe it took me like 4 or 5 hours, and probably like three and a half of which were just researching and like going through the names and spot checking the names, and like I probably could have spent a few more hours being more diligent on a lot of them, but because the price was so cheap, I was less diligent than I would usually be.
So do you expect your renewal rate on this batch is going to be lower? And but I would seriously doubt that you're just going to drop all of them or like even most of them come next year. Like
Yeah, I know.
walk me
I'm guessing
through
I'll
the difference
probably
in
like
the renewal rate, and then how you will you just like look at some of the traffic that you're getting, and then call the weak names based on some of the traffic and offers figures that you're getting?
I mean, based on my criteria, there's all like, and again, I wasn't as like not every single name that I registered I would have even processed through my eyes. Like it would have they just like fit into a set of criterias, and ended up getting into that batch. But I would, based on what I've looked at them all, since then, and I would say that like I'm probably at like 98%, 99% of them will probably be renewed. I do think that not unless it's very obvious that you've just like registered a bad name, you need more than a year to determine whether the name is worth renewing or not. Some of the best domainers that I've had the experience of interacting with said I've given a like one simple rule, and that's literally renew everything. Just renew everything. I deviate from that slightly because I think that there are some names that just are maybe not worth renewing. But even then, sometimes I look back on names that I dropped and I'm like, shit, I probably should have just renewed it. So I think that from like a general perspective, I would say, if you've got your like naming conventions down and you feel confident in your ability to select names, then you should probably just renew everything.
Mm.
I agree with that actually, and I started now, and I'm taking advantage of the Unstoppable, the transfer in. But Josh mentioned waiting yesterday on Unstoppable. I'm waiting now on a batch of names are moving in, and I talked to Brady about the process, and hopefully that's going to get sped up. But yeah, I just think that when you're able to renew them and know that and trust your process, and I'm getting better at this, I think that the sales will just come when they're supposed to come, but it just takes time. And I think that when you get a few sales and when you're testing something, one is validation, but then two, it's just peace of mind because you know your break even points on renewing them are going to be a couple sales, and then at that point it's just going to be for cash flow, and then that's how you grow your portfolio. I mean, at that or that you need those cash flow names, and I think it's a pretty interesting way to grow a portfolio in that strategy of test it out, a couple hundred names or whatever you did much bigger, but once you sell off your names, I mean, you can keep those as long as you trust your process 4, 5, 6, 10 years, and you're going to sell a decent amount of them, way more than what your renewal is, and that's going to be cash flow, and it
Yeah,
wasn't like
so
you went and bought 1,000 names at $10 and tried it out. You waited for the right price point, and the risk reward is so good at $4 for 700 names. That's well a little less than 3 grand. You sell two names and to break even on that. You know what I mean?
when you're yeah, I agree. So like when you're registering names, what you have to understand is that at the point of registration, there's zero, literally in most cases, zero demand, right? Because the domain is available to register, and like this comes at different scales as well, right? If it was a drop reg, and you registered it within a couple days or even a couple of weeks of when it became available, then there might be more demand than you think. But if it was a name that hasn't been registered for a year or 2 years or 3 years, then there's essentially close to no demand, right? And and just as a rule of thumb, I'll say this: that if it hasn't been registered for more than a year, I'm less likely to want to register it, to be honest. But it doesn't mean it's completely off the table. But my point of the matter is that once you register a name, don't like again. This name was available for anyone to pick up for $10, right? Once you register a name, it needs time to like mature. And a year is not enough for it to mature completely in most cases. Like it needs time to get that pent up demand from users that decide that they want to use that name and maybe brand on the .co or brand on the .io, and as years go by, your chances go up of selling that name. So yeah, for me, 1 year isn't enough to assess whether or not it's worth keeping.
Josh, I'm curious. You mentioned that you didn't vet all the names before registering them. What kind of tool were you using to generate them? Was this an AI tool? Maybe even Unstoppable Bot by chance? I mean, if you can tell us a little bit about the process of generating those names.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I don't use any AI, which is a super unpopular answer
Wow.
in today's.
How
Everyone
old are
thinks
you,
AI
Josh?
is
I thought
legit.
you were on the younger end of most domainers out here. Thought you were with
Everyone
the
wants
time.
everyone wants to be so trendy with I use AI for this, AI for that, and like I mean, it's the same thing with companies getting funded. It's like, oh my gosh, how can we say that we're an AI company? We better just add a chatbot in here or something. But yeah, no, I don't use any AI. Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you my exact process. That would be giving away a little bit too much. But I use tools like expired domains and all the typical tools that we know and love. I use them all when I'm buying and assessing viability of hand registrations. Yeah.
I also don't use any AI in the sense of like having it generate ideas for me, like for naming conventions. I use it because I don't want to concatenate in Excel all the two keywords together. So I just basically tell the AI, hey, here's a list of X amount of names, and put the keyword at the end.com and put it in a list, and then I put it in the bulk tool and I register them. So I mean, maybe I should clarify. I don't really use AI to help me think of names. I just basically use it to cheat to get it in the naming convention to do a bulk search, which maybe there's a different way to do it, but I mean that for me works pretty quickly. So yeah, but I actually use most of my lists I've been building over the years of I have so many keywords and just copy paste at I just basically say put in a list of 500 names, run it through bulk search and whatever's available. I don't even care to an extent if I put in those keywords and I did that search with the ones that I know, the 500 example. If it spits out 100 of them, as long as the spelling's correct, because the other day, actually, the AI spelled the name wrong, one of them, because it had a double letter in the middle, and I caught it, thank goodness. But that's the only time where I don't even look, because I just, basically, yeah, just at that price point, it doesn't even matter because I know that those are words that'll sell, and it's appended with whatever I'm looking for. So, you know, I'm not saying everybody should do that, but when you get a little bit more comfortable with your process and your lists and your keywords, just but be careful with the spelling. And it did misspell. I can't say the word quite yet what I was looking up, but it did misspell it in a few different multiples. Like I did 100 and the first 80 were correct, and then the last 20 were wrong. So that was interesting to me. So good thing I didn't just blindly look, and just assume. So yeah, that's one thing of AI tools. Be careful of that. And by the way, you won't really notice unless you spot check because, of course, if it's misspelled, it's going to definitely be available because more than likely it's a two keyword name you're trying to register. So just be mindful of that little PSA for people out there using AI tools. Make sure the spellings of, is exactly correct and just spot check them.
If I can add to what Josh and Renee mentioned, I would say that when it comes to AI, it's kind of important to make the distinction between AI being helpful because you use it as an assistant and AI being helpful because you use it to actually delegate the domain selection process to it. I do like based on my own testing and experience, I think AI is quite bad at domaining, to be perfectly honest. At least at this point, I'm sure things are going to change in the future, but at this point, I consider it quite bad at domaining. But
Mm.
it can be quite useful as an assistant. Like I'm Eastern European, right? English is not my native language. And so I still struggle with some things, like, for example, words that have British spelling versus US spelling, like color versus color, an extra U for the British spelling, or attorney versus solicitor, or consulting, counseling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for that kind of back and forth, I think AI is actually useful, to kind of, if you're unsure about something related to semantics or meaning or whatnot, it's just that I wouldn't personally delegate the domain selection process to it right now. But at the end of the day, something like Unstoppable Bot, for example, you can figure out ways to use it, I think, as an assistant of sorts, which in the end frees up time for you. Time you can better use to kind of focus on the things where you have a competitive advantage. Because of course, you're going to have name bio data incorporated in all of these AI models. You're going to have publicly available data incorporated. But like someone like myself who sells thousands of domains on the wholesale market, I don't report these. Once I have some, you have all these sales, they never get reported anywhere. And I take those sales into account when I consider which domains to buy because I automatically think, oh, I know this guy's buying this type of domain. I have another bulk buyer who buys that type of domains. Sometimes I even tailor my net to more esoteric investors who have a different model compared to most people. And when I see something I'm sure that person is going to buy, I don't think about it. I register it because in my brain, I have that database that I tap into. So I think, we're at the stage of the game, in my experience, for my use cases at least, where AI is useful as an assistant for things like spelling uncertainties or semantic related uncertainties and whatnot. But for domain selection, I think the reasoning needs to get a lot better for me to trust AI.
Yeah. I really like what Renee said about he uses it for basically formatting and like using his preferred patterns and like generating that in bulk. But he doesn't use it for, actually generating the insight and generating the name. And this is like reflective of the limitations of LLMs, in any domain, like vertical, not domain. In any, industry, we see like LLMs are like crazy subject matter experts for like the fine-tuned things. They're really good at coding, they're really good at pattern analysis, but they're really bad at taste. they're really bad at like strategy and like build like saying writing something beautiful that doesn't sound robotic. Like, and so if you're using AI, it makes the most sense to use it as you know, the last mile, basically. And so like you as a domainer still need to generate the insight. You need to see the, you know, like the brand or the flavor or the keyword that you like, but you can, you know, copy and paste into ChatGPT, hey, take that keyword and then try it in, you know, append AI and then prepend AI and then, you know, try a bunch of variations of brandables and misspellings and then just, you know, cover all your bases so that you can, you know, make sure that you're trying every variation of it that you like. I mean, for me, for an example, like I was listening to Ilya Sutskever the other day, the former co-founder of OpenAI, and he was talking about like the cortex of like people whose brains got like severed in two, and I was like, ooh, cortex. That's got a nice flavor to it. Let me use Unstoppable Bot. Let me give it a bunch of patterns like Cortex AI, AI Cortex, Cortex.ai, Cortex without the E, you know, all the Cortex with two X's, whatever all the variations could be. And then, you know, ChatGPT's and then Unstoppable Bot is obviously really good at like taking 20, like coming up with 25 variations of that keyword that I think is nice. And then, you know, checking the availability of it really rapidly. So I think that's how you should be using these tools is, you know, again, as Renee said, like the last mile, you know, do all the grunt work of like using all the you know, formatting and all the patterns that you like. But the key insight, like the taste making still needs to be done by you, the human.
On that note, by the way, I was just wanting out of curiosity, I had a list of 100 names that I would have registered, and I was on a ChatGPT. I mean, it was on a I was using Grok actually, and because it formatted pretty quickly, like in a second. But it had a hard time when I told it, look to see if these are registered or if these are available for registration, and it really struggled with it. And you could tell where it was looking, where it was going, and then I finally had to explain to it, go to Dynadot's reg path and basically look to see if all these are, and then but it broke down. So it's kind of interesting. Like it was really struggling with something like that. And, you know, so I was just for, you know, shits and giggles, I was like, how will I handle that request? And even when I specified how to do it, go to this registrar, see if these are like, it couldn't even really do it. It was pretty interesting.
Well, I mean, the
So
thing is, like, that's a multi-step process. The only LLM that really has the ability to do that is ChatGPT, and that would require spinning up the computer use agent, actually going to Dynadot, actually clicking, you know, searching for it, and then interpreting the results. The vast majority of LLMs, when they're doing web search, they just have a vectorized version of the web page that's been indexed already. So it can't actually, it's not like actually going to the web page and navigating around. That's not what's happening. It's just like it's basically like taking all the text from the web page into vector space and then you know returning you know the answer with that in its context. So anyway, that's why I can't do that, and that's why I had to build the Unstoppable Bot with the API connection to be able to do that. Is because none of these LLMs support that.
cool. Yeah, like I said, maybe I'm naive. I just was curious if it would work, and obviously it didn't, like you said. So that's proof that I wasn't like not doing something correctly. It was just doesn't work right now. So, but yeah, that's great you had that because that's pretty cool. Because I mean, again, at the end of the day, I was just doing it for formatting, but you know, it is helpful to know that you know that you have that tool. So it's you know just one less step that I have to you know go you know just make the names, paste into your guys' thing, by the name, and it's all set.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's obviously plenty of improvements that we can make there, like actually pulling it into the website, integrating it into bulk search, you know, pulling in expires and things like that. There's a ton of opportunity there. Any last thoughts, guys, before we wrap? I can't believe blanket finance sold. That's like I don't see it there. One of those sales where you got to see the forest for the trees. You can't you know zoom in too close and think one sale is indicative of broader user behavior. No offense, of course, Josh, but
No, no offense
blanket
taken.
finance
I would, I
wouldn't
would,
have been my first
I,
choice for a
I would,
financial firm.
I would assert that the decision to register that name is actually based on broader buyer behavior.
And by the way, blanket, because I have a finance background, so does Josh. Blanket's a very popular term in a lot of financial industries and products and things that are out there. So blanket is a very popular term in the finance world. And speaking of that, I Google blanket-financial.com is a company. So just an example of like how you just said that, but how you don't understand. Like, I'm not saying you should, but if you're in that, it's not as crazy as it sounds when you actually think about blanket in the context of a financial hierarchy in terms of terms and how much you hear about the word blanket thrown around in different verticals in finance. And Josh probably knows that as well, the word blanket.
Now I see. Gotcha.
I'm putting words in your mouth, Josh, but I'm sure that that's, I mean, it's, you understand that, you know better than them. The blankets are very,
Yeah.
popular term.
Interesting. I've never heard that term.
Also, I would like to kind of mention that I think beginners who are watching us need to understand that when Josh hand registered all of these domains in a few hours, that a lot of his experience with running portfolios is baked into that. He's not exactly in his first week of domaining. He has gathered data over the years since he's been doing that. He kind of knows, as he's alluded to previously, about buyer behavior, what sells, what doesn't. So what I mean by this is that the less experience you have, the more research you should be willing to put in. So I would say that a beginner who wants to attempt to do what Josh was doing would have to put in, I would recommend, a hell of a lot more research, because he does not have that experience baked in that Josh in our situation has. And so you have to kind of be mindful of that and be humble enough to understand that if you lack experience, you got to put in kind of the elbow grease in terms of additional research so that you can have confidence that what you're doing is, backed by data and likely to be conducive to making money. So I think it's a very important kind of piece of advice to give.
Yeah, well put. And I'm on the other end of that error right now, seeing blanket, thinking it's a totally random term unrelated to finance, and then, finding out that it's actually a well-used term. So that's exactly, I'm humbled right now, and I need to probably check my skepticism when I'm seeing, one of Mike Mann's many sales and saying, who the fuck is buying that name? Maybe I can be a good domainer. If that's the quality of name that's actually selling, perhaps there's more to every name than first appears. So anyways, on that note, guys, let's wrap it up. Go forth and register on $5 Fridays here. Hope you take advantage. Maybe look over all your names before you register them. Don't listen to Josh too closely. Not everyone can shoot from the hip like that and still hit the target. So get out there, and like I said, we're changing our promos quite soon. So take advantage of our transfers in for $5.55 for comms while you still can, because those are not going to be around forever. As always, you can reach me on Twitter, DM me. I love to hear your feedback. Try out list for sale without transferring in. You can do that on our homepage. You'll see right next to the search bar, there's a little list button that you click, and you can forward to our landers as well, so that you can get those sweet self-brokerage landers for just 3%, as well as and all the other good stuff. That's enough shilling for today, guys. Thank you again. Enjoy your Friday and your weekend. Go touch some grass. Take a dip in the pool. Do something fun. And we will catch you next week. See you guys.